Good morning, everyone. Again, thank you for your patience as we got off to a little bit of a late start. Um, Welcome to day 2 of the Valuing Black Lives 2016 Second Annual Global Emotional Emancipation Summit. I'm Cheryl Tawede Grills, and I wanted to give you a brief recap of yesterday, but because of the time factor, I'm going to not go over a summary of things that were shared in the prior panels, but for the benefit of those who were not here yesterday, you missed a good day. We were able to hear from and get some grounding from the past Elder of Elders, Linda James Myers from the Association of Black Psychologists. Tony Browder did an amazing overview of the story of Africa before the rupture. Ibram Kendi shared his summary of what I think is one of the most important books that we need to be reading in small circles and study groups. He set the stage for the anti-Black narrative, and it was an analysis or summary from his book, Stamped from the Beginning. And then we had our first actual panel, which did the framing, exposing the anti-Black narrative and how it works, and that included Mariel Fanon Mendez France, Mamadou Malcolm Jallo, and Esther Arma. The events from yesterday actually were live streamed, and I believe there is a link, and we'll make sure we get the link information for folks because you can continue to access that information. We also are streaming on Facebook throughout the day. So what is most important is that from each panel, we will be getting a set of recommendations for action steps for 2017. And I wanted to share with you the 4 major action items, and we took temperature readings in the circles yesterday. And actually this room was full, so we had a pretty robust set of discussions after the panel, and then people's own sense of which of the 4 action items they felt were most likely to have traction and assist in this process of our liberation. So the 4 action items: 1, engage your representatives, policymakers to implement the UN recommendations on the decade for people of African descent. Action item number 2 was work to open publicly the file on reparation to work on the UNESCO Declaration on Race in order to delete this non-concept in all UN and national documents. Action item number 3, tell the story of your country's national anthem. And then action item number 4, launch a global visual campaign, #BlackandFree, what does this look like? And I do have the results of the temperature reading from yesterday. We're going to keep adding to this list as the panelists present and share their information. At the end of the day today, we are actually going to do a live polling process. So people who are actually watching through live stream will also be able to join in on the voting. And we will give you the information so that you can use your laptops, your iPads, your cell phones, or let one of us know you don't have any of the electronics on you. We will provide you with some kind of access to get your vote in. But the action item right now that seems to be getting the most traction is action item number 4. So we shall see what happens as the day progresses. I know we have a set of really exciting action items. And you should also know that at the end of the convening, some weeks out, we will send everyone a communique that summarizes all of the action steps and key points in the deliberations. We did one from last year. We can also make that available to people. It's on the website for Community Healing Network.
What was the date you said?
Oh, I didn't give a date. Last time we gave a date like 2 weeks out, and we nearly killed ourselves trying to get that thing summarized. So you notice I gently said some weeks after you will get the summary communique. Okay, so with that, I'd like to move on and actually introduce today's opening presenter, and who's going to give us yet another angle on this huge elephant in the room called race, racism, and the devaluing of Black lives. And this is Dr. Dr. Benson George Cook. I know Benson from way back when. I don't know where George came out first from, except I haven't finished drinking my coffee. And Dr. Cook is actually one of the past presidents of the Association of Black Psychologists. This is a project that is near and dear. This collaboration with the Association of Black with the Community Healing Network, is near and dear to the hearts of the association. And so you see a number of our presidents participating. Last year, Dr. Wade Nobles was present. Dr. Linda James Myers was also a past president, and our current president is in the back of the room, Dr. Kevin Washington. So I just wanted to acknowledge that he was here. So Dr. Cook is going to share with us the anti-Black narrative in action, Hollywood, and that will set us up for a brief emotional emancipation circle experience. Dr. Cook, let me switch this out and pull.
You're the timekeeper? Okay, keep me on time. Okay. Good morning, Hotep family. How you doing? Okay. Before I begin, I just have a little activity I want to do, and I need everyone to participate in this activity. So can I get an ashe? Okay. All right. So here's the activity. I have in my hand some paper. What color is the paper? Okay, that's not trickery. Okay. The color of the paper is what? Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell me the color of the paper 3 times. I want you to spell it once. And then I'm gonna ask you a question, but let's get into it. This is like call response, Black church experience, okay? So the color of the paper is what? White. Okay, we're getting there. Spell it. W-H-I-T-E. Okay, now I'm gonna ask you to do it quicker this time, and then I need you to answer a question very quickly. Everybody got me? Okay, the color of the paper is what? White. Spell it? W-H-I-T-E. Okay, you almost got it. We're gonna do it one more time, because I see some people whose lips ain't moving. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm feeling it the wrong way. Again, the color of the paper is what? White. Spell it? W-H-I-T-E. Okay, what do cows drink? What do cows drink? What do cows drink? What do cows drink? All right. Look, like they say, I won't tell nobody if you don't tell nobody. Here's the importance of this activity. There was a book written back in the 1970s called Subliminal Seduction by Wilson Bryan Key. What's significant about that is it talked about the work that advertisers could do to subliminally seduce you to do what economically you couldn't afford to do. I want to take it to another level, that there is an industry out there that is very much bent on making sure that you don't know nothing about who you are, and that every so often when you begin to get so full of yourself that you think you're more than they want you to think you are, they come back again and drop another subliminal message on you. This one was really very impactful for me, and here's what I mean by the statement I just made. I'm not going to be able to talk about everything here, but I'm going to talk about how images convey ideas that affect behavior, which results in a cultural conditioning. What's significant about that is that if we're looking at being able to establish our emotional emancipation, it means that we need to be aware of the impact of the narrative. There's an African fable, Aesop, and of course Aesop was a brother. And I like the one that was told by Jamal Karam, who is a story man who kind of deals with this for our people. And he starts off by saying self-preservation is the first law of nature. An African scholar and an old lion were walking through the great African rainforest. They were debating about who was the strongest, man or lion. As they entered a clearing in the forest, they saw a huge wooden sculpture. The sculpture was of a Maasai warrior conquering a lion. He said, "Look there," said the scholar. "See how strong that warrior is. That proves that I am right. Man is the strongest." The lion was like, my brother, this does not prove a thing, because if sculptures were made by lions," he explained, "the lion would be conquering the man." Now, what Aesop was trying to drop on you is that how the story ends always depends on who the storyteller is. Now, this is crucial. Why is this crucial? Because stories are the foundation for folklore, which is the foundation for mythology, and oftentimes fables gets put in there too. And discerning the thin line between the two is something that cinema oftentimes tries to do for the purpose of conditioning you culturally. In that context, there's a piece here that kind of talks about stories. You can look at it very quickly. I want to go to the next one, though, for the sake of time. And I want to talk about a statement that was made by Carter G. Woodson. And you've heard it before, but I want you to hear it now in the contextualization of this issue. If you can control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his action. When you can determine what a man shall think, you do not have to concern yourself about what he will do. If you can make a man feel that he is inferior, you do not have to compel him to accept an inferior status, for he'll seek it himself. And if you make a man think that he is justly outcast, you do not have to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. And if there is no back door, his very nature will demand one. Now, what's significant about this is something that I had an opportunity to talk with Enola and Cheryl about at the recent convention of the Association of Black Psychologists, which is how I ended up standing before you today. I was one of those moments where I like to kind of get into stories like, did you know or did you understand? So on the far left of where you're sitting and looking at the screen, you see a book titled Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This book was written back in 1912. As you probably are very aware, after the 1912 version, there were a series of other short stories and movies that came out in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. If you were in the 60s or the 70s, a period of time that I was looking at movies on TV, Johnny Weissmuller was Tarzan of the Apes. Now, it was always something about it that kind of troubled me, but I wasn't always real sure. But it was the spirit of the ancestors kind of trying to make me aware. They're trying to hoodwink you. They're trying to make you think that cows drink milk when they really drink water. Which kind of, want to go to this point. It's interesting, Dr. Grills, when you said George. George was the name of my grandfather. So basically, my grandfather was reminding me that he's here. That's what that was. Okay, so moving on, kind of tying it all together. So in 1999, Disney did a Tarzan movie. It was an animation. What's interesting, if you go back and look at that, there are no African people at all. So here we have the minds of our young people being told that there is a continent where we're supposed to exist, but we're invisible. That's very important. The Invisible Man was written for a reason, to help us understand how we need to become visible to ourselves. But I digress, go on to this. So Warner Brothers came up with this movie. Now, when Warner Brothers came up, I've written on this before, and so I said, wow, I wonder who's in this movie. This several months, about a year before the movie came out. So I'm looking through, and all of a sudden I see Samuel Jackson. I said, that's a fellow Morehouse brother. I wonder what he's doing in Tarzan. I mean, I'm kind of curious. Curious minds want to know. So I see he's playing George Washington Williams. I said, okay. So at this point, the investigative scholar comes out. Who is George Washington Williams? Now, I'm not trying to embarrass anyone here, but by a show of hands, who knows who George Washington Williams is? Now, I want everybody to look around. Don't take your hand down. Look around. Look around. Now, put your hand down. Thank you. For the rest of you, don't feel bad until after I talk to you. And then you can feel bad. To the right, we see of the screen Samuel Jackson in two images that I captured. The top image is where he is trying to kind of con his way into going with the Earl of Greystoke to Africa. Okay, because in the film, King Leopold of Belgium would like him to go there. In the bottom part, of course, you see the swashbuckler carrying his gun, rifle, guns loaded, kind of like Tonto to the Lone Ranger, following behind Tarzan. Okay, this gets better. So as I started investigating this, I said, well, where did they get the information to do this? So George Washington Williams is a real life person. And I say this to people, as I said to Cheryl Nolan, you know him, but you don't know him. So let's get into that. He's a real life historical figure, but what I found is that this guy Yates, who sent the script, you don't know what you don't know, probably off of Wikipedia, said, yeah, Samuel, why don't you read this? This will give you some information. Now here's where, again, the scholar in you comes out. When you hear somebody talking about something and you know they don't know what they're talking about. As I listened to an interview of Samuel Jackson before the movie came out, it was kind of like what I was reading and what I was hearing didn't match. So it made it clear that he really did not know. Now, for those of you who are wondering who this man is, he's the one who made the movie with Black Snake Moan. He was also the one who directed Hustle and Flow. You know, hard out here for a pimp. You know, okay. So clearly, this is a black guy who supposedly understands who we are. This is a picture of George Washington Williams, written by one of the most esteemed scholars to have ever written a history book, John Hope Franklin. John Hope Franklin is known as a historian in every circle of anybody who writes about history. But as I said earlier, you don't know what you don't know. If you go to YouTube, look up John Hope Franklin, look up George Washington Williams, you're going to see a clip. That clip that you're going to see basically shows you how he did not know who George Washington Williams was when he started his work. He was invited to write a history of black people. So he went to Carter G. Woodson. And Carter G. Woodson says, no, my brother, you need to go to the source. The source? Yeah, that's George Washington Williams. What? He started doing his investigation and stumbled upon this information at an HBCU where he was teaching at the time. He went back and said, man, how come we don't know about this man? And Carter G. Woodson said, because they don't want you to know about him. Even Frederick Douglass said this man was a giant. So here's what's important. Warner Brothers said that George Washington Williams, portrayed by Samuel Jackson, would be a highly fictionalized version of the real life character. A man, for the most part, who, and I usually would ask people to raise their hands on this, I'm not, only lived 41 years. So anybody who's 41 and under, think of this. In a 41-year period, he lived from 1849 to 1891. What this man basically did, I said, you know him, but you don't know him. During his lifetime, this man, at the age of 14, joined the Union Army to fight for our freedom from enslavement. He became an officer, left there, fought in the War of Mexico to help them gain their rights as a republic. Came back from that, basically decided that he would stay in the Army, and they wanted him to engage in the Indian Wars, Native Americans. He didn't want that. He said, that's not right. What you're doing is just not right. So he pretty much left the Army as an officer. Went to Howard University for a year. Things didn't really work out the way he wanted them to. Went to a seminary school up in Boston. Graduated at the top of his class, because when he went there, they said, no, you're a black man, you ain't gonna do too well. But he graduated at the top of his class. Became a pastor of 2 churches. The second one was the largest populated church in New England. Left there, went to the state of Ohio, became the first black state senator for the state of Ohio. Became a columnist and then a journalist of one of the largest newspapers. Became an attorney. I ain't through talking about the brother yet, okay? Then decided we need to know something about ourselves. So he wrote the first volume of Black history, History of the Negro Race in America from 1619 to 1880. Again, it's no mistake, emotional emancipation, going from 1619 and what we want to accomplish by 2019, so that we'll be moving by 2020. Brother went back and wrote the second volume. And John Hope Franklin said at the time that he was writing, he had never seen a history book as well put together as this. over 1,000 pages. Okay? Brother wasn't through yet. Did a compendium of our history. Brother wasn't through yet. Wrote a history of Negro troops in the War of the Rebellion, 1861 to 1865. Prolific writer. But I contend, when you begin to look at the work that came out of this, he didn't write this one, but you look at this, he became the first Pan-African. Not only was he fighting for the rights of African Americans, he began fighting for the rights of African folk. The reason I put this book up here is because it begins to give you a true picture, like the video clip we saw yesterday, that gives you a visceral feeling of the impact of oppression. King Leopold of Belgium. If you've ever been there and you see all of the beautiful buildings, we built those buildings. If we didn't put our hand on it, it's the blood that made the mortar, that made the capital possible. What King Leopold did, and you probably didn't know this, but you got to deal with the elephant in the room, is to maintain control over the rubber plantations, to maintain control of the gold mines, the diamond mines, and all of the other rich minerals. He basically attacked the people not only culturally, but physically. If you imagine you have a family and you're not working hard enough, he'll ask you, how many people have children? Raise your hand. He'll take your children, put them in front of you, cut their hands off, cut their feet off. He ain't done, make you hold them. Read this book, you'll see pictures of it, if you think I'm making it up. Despicable. Do despicable things to your spouse. If you're still not working hard enough, then he would lynch you or crucify you. And if he felt that still you were not doing enough there, he would burn the village down with you in it. Over 10 million, everybody say this, 10 million. Everybody, 10 million. During King Leopold's reign, over 10 million Congolese were murdered, killed. Okay? And so George Washington Williams spoke out about this. Now, King Leopold thought he could bamboozle him. To shut him out, he said, look, why don't you come as a guest of mine, by my invitation, to see the wonderful things I'm doing. But what he showed him instead, behind the closed doors, behind the canopy of the forest, was the atrocities. So he wrote an open letter. You see it in this book, you see it in John Hope Franklin's book, to King Leopold, where he talked about all of the things that were going on. So let me go back. The significance of this is that now you have a 2016 Warner Brother movie of Tarzan portraying your hero as a sidekick, as a Tonto to the Lone Ranger, where they even go so far as to suggest that it is Tarzan, the Earl of Greystoke, that the king wants to come. And then George Washington Williams, the sidekick, is running around trying to bamboozle his way through. Now, in one of the interviews, Samuel Jackson indicated, and this is where I knew he didn't know the history of it, he was a teenager, 16 to 18 years old. No, he was 14. Then he said, well, he was kind of a rogue character. Well, let's go back. He was around the same time as Frederick Douglass. Wouldn't you have to be rogue at that time if you go and read when they tell you they'll kill you if you read? If you go and study when they tell you they'll kill you if you study? Yes, he was rogue, but not in the way they tried to flip it, okay? So this is why this becomes important. So here we go. Inequality continues to persist. If you look in the one on the left, you'll basically see that when it comes to those people who are directing, not producing, but just directing, it is abysmal in terms of the numbers, especially when it comes to our African women, our black women. Some look at the scale on the right, or the chart on the right, and they say, well, if you think about it, 12.5 black film actors, that's close to the population you are in America. But it doesn't take into consideration the contributions that we've made, which is one of the things that Tarzan in 1912 was written by Edgar Rice Burroughs to depict the hegemony of white supremacy over African people, by suggesting that in darkest Africa, in the primitive world of the jungle, not dark in the sense of the sun hardly shined there, or, there were no lights there, but in the sense that we were not the cradle of civilization as we really are. So in that context, it becomes really important to recognize, and I'm going to focus on the middle piece, they should realize the influence and deep psychological impression conveyed by the portrayal of Africa in need of a European lord on the minds of our susceptible, impressionable children. Our children do not deserve to have their history and culture consciously whitewashed for the sake of Hollywood revenues or to diminish the historical realities of European tyranny. So what this conversation is about us recognizing that even though somebody shows us one thing that subliminally makes us think something else, it is incumbent upon us to really study to show ourselves approved from a biblical perspective, but from a historical perspective, to know our history, because only then can we know who we truly are. In other words, we got another movie coming out. Now, I'm not trying to step on no toes, but I find it interesting that over the past couple of years, this movie has won every major award outside of the U.S., but when it's about to be shown here, now all of a sudden you're going to bring up the history of the person who directed when he was 17 years old. I'm not saying that what he did was right. I'm saying that this is an effort to suggest, y'all don't need to be saying that. That was a bad man that did that. Rather than, hey, what will happen if the Black Lives Movement catches hold of a black man who died to free his people? Okay? This is really an important thing. So again, this is like the Nat Turner slave revolt titled Birth of a Nation, not to be confused with the 1915, The Birth of a Nation. Don't want you to confuse it, because they're going to try to throw that at you next. I want to end it on talking about a statement that John Henry Clark made. History is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. The role of history is to tell a people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. The most important role that history plays is that it has the function of telling a people where they still must go and what they still must be. The relationship of history to a people is the same as the relationship of a mother to the child. We've got some nurturing to do. And the nurturing begins by now you all dropping the knowledge that's been dropped on you to the people that you know about George Washington Williams. Let them go see the Tarzan movie. I'm going to be doing some focus groups on that stuff. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, and it's really ironic. I talked with a cousin of mine at a wedding recently who had gone to see it. And I said, what'd you think about it? He said, man, it's kind of a cool movie, man. That Samuel Jackson character was really cool, swashbuckler dude, I said, yeah. I said, did you know he was real life? What? Not really. And when I dropped on him what I dropped on you, not only did he turn several shades of color, he was like, man, I would have had a whole different perspective if I had known that. But that was not the intention. In other words, the end is really the beginning, and that is to understand the concept of Sankofa. Go back and fetch it, the symbol of wisdom. You can't know who you are unless you know who you were, and that helps you to know where you're going. And on that note, we got to build the future by knowing the past. I thank you.
Thank you, George and Dr. Cook. When I first heard this story, when Enola and I first heard this story, and we were sitting with Benson at the conference, it started triggering memories for me about Hollywood and about images that I saw. So he's presented you with one perspective, and I want us to have a brief, we're going to do it very brief this time, circle discussions about the Hollywood, your Hollywood moment. And I want to share with you my startling Hollywood moment. And I've been working real hard on trying to decolonize my mind. And the more I work on it, the more I realize is there to unpack and get rid of. So let me share, starting with a quote from James Baldwin, who said, "The American ideal of progress is measured by how fast I become white." And that really captures my Hollywood moment that literally about a month ago I discovered. And so, you know, when Hollywood presents us with stuff, we've got to be careful. So Gwendolyn Brooks, you know, our leaders, our visionaries, our artists, they've been giving us warnings and tools, and we have just not been listening. Gwendolyn Brooks said, "Be careful what you swallow, chew." And so when I think about the images and the things that I've been exposed to in Hollywood, I don't chew, I just swallow. But then as a child, I really don't chew. You know, the mind of the child is like a sponge. It's like, oh, okay. So what was my Hollywood moment? Somehow Benson's story triggered for me what was a family joke. And the family joke was that as a little girl, I used to always say, "I want my Shirley Temple curls." "No, Mommy, give me Shirley Temple curls." Anything, any big event, I wanted Shirley Temple curls. Time for school pictures, I wanted Shirley Temple curls. And I mean, it was like, it was gonna be all hell in my house if I didn't get my Shirley Temple curls. What I came to realize, though, as I got older, was that no matter how good my mother did, or my aunts or my grandmothers did the Shirley Temple curls, I could never be Shirley Temple. But I didn't realize how important it was for me to become this girl here, to live up to that image. So there's Shirley Temple. There was my attempts as a child. I had no idea, all the way down to the little bow tie. I had no idea how much I had swallowed and how much I struggled with my own image and how much I was trying to match up to the American ideal and be the little Shirley Temple. And I didn't realize that no matter how much I tried, and I cried, that I could never be Shirley Temple. But it took me many, many, many years after that to realize I don't want to be Shirley Temple. I can be better than a Shirley Temple by being who I am. So I want to ask you, in the spaces that you're in now, and so the people that are sitting against the walls, you'll need to just go to an open space and take 10 minutes to see if you can see yourself. So yesterday we talked about Sawubona, I see you. But can we see ourselves? Can we go inside and find the Hollywood moment? What characters, television shows, movies, images became etched into your psyche? How did they impact you? So just take a minute and share your stories and see if any insights come up, and not everybody's going to be able to tell their story, but you may see yourself in someone else's story. It's only when we start doing this kind of work that we will actually be in the moment of the Underground Railroad, freeing ourselves. So everyone, I'll let you know when you have about 2 minutes left. People on the walls, go find a circle space and find your Hollywood moment and share it with others. And you're on. Oh, they're cordless? Okay. Unfortunately, our time is up. 1 minute? Okay, one more minute. Okay, so I hope you had an opportunity to see at least two things, maybe three. One, the power of Hollywood and its effects on our sense of ourselves, how we see each other, and how we behave therein. And then secondly, the power of the circle, having an opportunity to actually be able to share your story. And as you talk, you begin to see yourself. And as you hear others, you begin to see yourself. And then third, the importance of community to us. And these circles give us a sense of community. So where we would normally in a full circle actually begin to unpack this some more and debrief about it and talk about takeaways, you'll have to form a circle so you can see it go through completion. But I thank you for taking the time to look at this issue of unpacking Hollywood and its impact on our lives. And so without delay, I'm going to ask that we now transition to our first panel, and I will have our moderator, facilitator come up and describe what is going to happen next. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to get prepared for our next session. And we have a panel, 6 very distinguished panelists. And what we're going to do is we're going to have them come up, and they've been asked to identify 3 practical and concrete suggestions as to how we can best engage. And then we've also asked them for one simple step that we can do in 2017 to move this forward. It is very difficult to shift and transition. I would like to thank Dr. Cook for just a powerful, yes. Please.
I just wanted to say, for those who are interested in more information, I did do a program on the Joe Madison Show. I can give you a link to that before you leave. And I also did an article in the Psych Discourse, which is ABSI's news journal, and I can give you information on how to get that as well. Thanks.
So let's thank Dr. Cook one more time. Thank you. It is hard to transition, and one of the things we want to do as we come through this is to put on the learner's hat. I work in corporate America, and part of my role is to develop leaders. And then I will tell you, they begin to look at leaders early in their 20s and their 30s. They begin to identify and create and build those leaders early on so that by the time they're in their 50s, they're ready to become CEOs. And then something Dr. Cook said, he talked about when he was thinking, he put on his researcher's mind, his hat, the analysis, to begin asking questions. And one of the things that we're finding with leaders, and we're doing this up at Yale, is that we're asking our leaders to look at the difference between learning and knowing. Knowers know they have the answers, but learners ask questions. And so I would ask us to really begin to step back and think about what are the questions, because questions drive you to a different place. And so when Dr. Cook talked about, I put on my learner's hat, you begin to ask questions and probe. So I'm going to ask also as you go through this day, is capture key notes and ideas that come to mind that you can refer back to later on so that you can refer to those and have those. So this also is about learning and moving forward. So in keeping with that, we have 6 panelists. Our first panelist is Dominic Molden. Would you come up, Dominic? And Dominic is a native of East Baltimore with extensive experience in community organizing and affordable housing development. He has been the resource organizer for organizing neighborhood equity, 1DC, since 1997. Throughout his career, Molden has led programs designed to encourage democratic, social, and economic development. Next, we have Jessica Gordon Nebhard. She's the author of Collective Courage and History of African American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice, and 2016 inductee into the U.S. Cooperative Hall of Fame. She is a political economist and professor of community justice and social economic development in the African Studies Department at John Jay College, City University of New York. We next have Wekesa Madzimoya. Wekesa has been called a master teacher. I like that. Master teacher by Dr. Asa Hillard, Dr. Lisa Delpet, and many others. He's a co-founder of AYA, Educational Institute, which provides adult and youth education that offers solutions for the oppression that has made our intrapersonal, interpersonal, and group communications toxic, riddled with conflict and compromised by the need to compensate for perceived worthlessness. Wekesa's publications and presentations include Warriors, Healers, and Builders, and the Armanetta Warrior, Healer, Builder story. Next, we have Isis Amlak. Isis? Okay, Isis, we'll be right back. We have Kara Poole. Kara is a creator and producer of the Great Griot, a Black history web channel that focuses on telling the undiluted history of our revolutionary leaders and sheds light on key events from an African-centered perspective. With each video, she hopes to visually inspire the masses of Black people globally on the persistences of our ancestors possessed by the spirit of liberation. We have Kelly Wickham Hurst. Kelly is the founder and CEO of Being Black at School, an initiative to empower parents and educators to make schools safe for Black students. She's a 23-year public veteran as both a teacher and an administrator. Kelly has been a writer for 11 years online, where she honed her voice to speak about our systemic racism. And Isis will join us, but let me just give you her background. Isis is an African Queen Mother warrior, originally from Trinidad in the Caribbean. She spent 40 years in the UK living in West London. She's a Pan-Africanist, an activist, campaigner, and poet active in the repertory justice movement for people of African heritage in the UK and globally. So we have our 6 panelists, and we'll go through, have each of them present. What we're going to also ask you to do is, if you have questions, we want you to have succinct questions, and we will entertain those. We'll take a few. For those we can't get to, we have white cards. Please write your questions on the white cards. We will capture those. We want to keep that. And so with that, we'll start.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to spend my 7 minutes talking about emotional emancipation from the ground up. And from the ground up, I mean from the community perspective and from a grassroots perspective. Just several blocks away up the street on 7th Street, I've been organizing for 30 years in Washington, D.C. And the last 10 years with organizing neighborhood equity, or One DC. And some of our members are here today. And we are a resident-led community organizing collective that focuses on low-income Black people in D.C. and their human rights to housing and land, income and jobs, health and wellness. And through the voices of our people, we have learned that wellness should be a human right. So if you take away anything from my 7 minutes today, join us in the struggle to fight for wellness as a human right. And as Angela Davis told us at our 10th anniversary celebration, self-care is a revolutionary act. And today, we are participating in the revolution. To continue, I want to quote Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks said, "Self-love is the foundation of a loving practice. Without it, our other efforts to love fail. Giving ourselves love, we provide our inner being with the opportunity to have the unconditional love we may have always longed for to receive from someone else." So as part of the One DC political manifestation, we say that we have a right to wellness, and that wellness means practicing our breathing, being able to walk freely, eating well, and exercising. And so the narrative that we impart is that when you think about organizing in DC and Black organizing in the United States, wellness is rooted in that organizing. It is not an appendage. Wellness should be integrated into that. And healthy living is a Black thing. Let's be clear, right? And another comment I want to make is, especially in urban areas, there is this tendency to think that farming and gardening is the new things of the urban pioneers. But let me make it clear. Black gardening and Black farming is old news. My grandfather, John Henry Stewart, was born in Prince George's County in 1894. He lived 94 years, and I knew him very well. In West Baltimore, he had the biggest farm in the neighborhood, okay? And so we need to understand that these are the practices that we need to impart on the next generations, and that wellness is not for the elite. When we talk about the social determinants of health and health inequality, that is unacceptable for any person, especially working class and poor Black people in this country, to not have a right to wellness. And so, to end my comments, I want to quote Bell Hooks again and keep it again in the context of when we organize for human rights, it's not just about housing and land, not just about income and jobs, but it's about health and wellness being intertwined into this vision for emotional emancipation. Love is a profoundly political statement. Our deepest revolution will come when we understand this truth. Love is profoundly political, and that's why wellness is political. Only love can give us the strength to go forward in the midst of heartbreak and misery. Only love can give us the power to reconcile, to redeem, the power to renew our weary spirits, and save lost souls. The transformative power of love is the foundation of all meaningful social change. And that's why we organize. Without love, our lives are without meaning. Love is the heart of the matter. When all else falls away, love sustains. Let's fight for the right to wellness and our own emancipation. Thank you. Yes. So the 3 points that I would like to emphasize is one, is that we all should be organizing for our right to wellness. In our local communities, we should be organizing on a daily basis so we can practice this right through breathing, exercising, farming, gardening, yoga, meditation. And then lastly, for 2017, I think we need to begin to look at tying the movement for Black lives and the right to wellness and the right to wellness as a human rights, and thinking about in our communities, where are we developing spaces of wellness or wellness centers? It's something concrete, right? So we have recreation centers for sports, right? Why don't we look at our communities having wellness centers everywhere to take care of our need to be loved and our ability to love to stay well? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, the last one is that we should be organizing to create wellness spaces and wellness centers in all our communities.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I actually am also a member of 1DC, but what I'm going to say might sound like it's very opposite to what Dominic just said, but hopefully by the time I'm finished, you might see some of the connections. This is also an area that 1DC is working on, as well as some other groups. I'm going to argue that we can't change the narrative, the racial narrative, until we have racial economic equality and economic justice. And I say that partly following Fannie Lou Hamer, who hopefully most of you know who she was, a SNCC member, voting rights organizer. But the last 10 years of her life, after being beaten almost to death several different times for registering to vote and helping other people to register to vote, she switched her tactics a little bit, and she became an advocate for cooperative economics and cooperative ownership. And what she tried to articulate was that in fighting for our civil rights, our political rights, it was hard if we started from a place of disenfranchisement and economic, sorry, can't think of the word, of economic injustice and lack of economic power, right? Because she said, if you remember, the other thing about her was after she registered to vote, she was thrown off the land. She was a sharecropper with her husband, a tenant farmer, right, perpetual debt. So she said they can retaliate against us when we fight for our rights if we don't have our economic independence first. So I didn't own my own land, I didn't produce my own food, and so they tried to take all that away from me to stop me politically. So she regrouped and she said, we need to own our own land, we need to produce our own food, we need to have our own affordable housing, we need a place of economic strength and independence, and then go back and fight for the political and social rights. And so she started Freedom Farm, a cooperative. She had an affordable housing project on that. They had a total food program, et cetera. And so that's the tradition I'm coming from. And so I'll connect back with Dominic and our first speaker who talked about Sankofa, right? We've got to go back to go forward. And the research I did in the book Collective Courage was all about regaining that legacy of cooperative ownership among African Americans. Because once I talked about, and actually Enola and I talked about co-ops 20 years ago, right? And when I started talking about it to black groups, to do urban revitalization, et cetera, everyone looked at me, co-op, so that's a hippie. White hippies do that. Black people don't do that. Didn't sound right to me, so I went back in time, and took me about 15 years because it turned out there was so much information I couldn't figure out when to stop. I thought I would have about a 2-year project, show a few examples, make my case, move on, maybe bring in some other ethnic groups, but I'm still finding out stuff. And in fact, I still have people coming up to me telling me stuff I left out of the book, and I know I left stuff out. And I know there's more to uncover. Now I'm telling people to uncover it for themselves. But the point is we have a long, strong legacy from when we were first brought here in chains of collective cooperative economics, and came out in a variety of ways. The earliest official forms were mutual aid societies, and then we actually, as soon as the Europeans brought a formal cooperative structure, business structure, we immediately adopted that also, and we have this incredibly strong, rich co-op movement history. So I urge us to go back and fetch that history, to take that legacy, to help us understand the role that cooperatives can play in community economic development and economic liberation. And that's the piece that I've focused on, how it can help with economic liberation. Why can co-ops help with economic liberation and community economic development? One, they address market failure, which is an economics term, but I think you all understand it, meaning where the market, for-profit businesses fail us in producing the goods and services that we actually need to survive, right? Co-ops help to fill that gap. Because they're profit-making and helping people outside the community is not their purpose. Their purpose is to pool people together, to use their own resources to create the things that they need, and then to control that economic business, that economic enterprise. And so they overcome the market failure. They overcome historical barriers to development because you're not expecting one person to know everything and do everything, but this is collective entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, where people together as a team can do all the things they need to do to run an enterprise and to run it well. They also redistribute resources and wealth because everybody pools what they have and then gives back as needed, as well as creates wealth because now you're the owner of this thriving business, and so whatever wealth gets created gets democratically decided back to everybody. We stabilize communities, anchor communities. Co-ops actually have longer longevity than traditional small businesses, mostly because, again, you're pooling, you're reducing risks and pooling all the resources in a better way. And also, the other thing that's really interesting that I found with co-ops is they produce leadership and other kinds of skills, because in order to run a company democratically with other people, you have to actually be a continuous learner. You need to understand both the business side and the math and the accounting side, but you also need to know and learn human relationship building, right? How to work together, talk together, come to consensus, that kind of thing. All those skills then impact you in so many ways that you let it spill over into the rest of your life. And we've been studying about how people who are involved in co-op housing, co-op businesses, then go on and do other things in the rest of their community. They create other things, they take on leadership in other places, etc. I think I'm out of time, so I just wanted to end with my other two suggestions. There are organizations that are doing co-op development and that need help, like 1DC, the Southern Grassroots Economies Project, Federation of Southern Cooperatives, all have projects to do more co-op development. And my one thing that I would leave us with is I think we need to start with young people, teaching young black people cooperative economics, helping them to create their own co-ops, because then they bring their families with them, right? We reconnect them to the adult world, but also when they become adults, they already understand the program. They already know how to run a co-op business, and they can jump right in it and bring the rest of us along. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. When Jessica first came, she said that she may be on the opposite end of Moldova. I think somewhere there's a middle.
Right.
And so one thing about when you have differences, that's where innovation and creativity come from. So a very, very great perspective, and so thank you. Wakesa.
Hotep family.
Hotep.
All righty. 7 minutes. let's roll with it. What's wrong? What's the biggest challenge? The biggest challenge is that we are under attack from every corner, so you can sweeten it up, but that's the bottom line. Also, it's important. All right, so that's the biggest challenge. How do we handle the fear? How do we handle the consequences? And when? For me, what I'm suggesting and what we built, I'm co-director of AYA Educational Institute, and we've created a paradigm called warrior, healer, builder. And that to me is how we both answer, we dismantle this anti-African narrative, and we create our own. Warrior is not the way we use warrior metaphorically. Metaphorically, you can keep using it whenever something's a struggle or I'm in war. But when we say warrior, we mean actively challenging 3 things: people, policies, and practices that oppress our people. That's when I'm into my warrior mode. Though I may use it metaphorically when it's just a struggle, I'm not activating the warrior mode unless I'm actively challenging people, policies, and practices. Now, the next thing is builder. The builder, my building skills support my revolutionary activity, but when I'm building AYA Education Institute and folks ain't got no money, or they don't pay me on time, or we gotta do what we gotta do, that is not revolution. I mean, that is not war. I'm not at war with my parents when I'm trying to collect money from them and they ain't gonna pay me. I'm not at war with them. It may be a struggle, but I'm not at war with them. I'm learning to build with them, okay? The key element, the struggle in terms of building, is how do we build knit trust where distrust is induced? Oppression induces me not to trust me and definitely not to trust you, okay, based on any kind of differences or anything, all right? And so the key is, this is not just it's a mindset, it's also a skill set. How skilled am I to literally knit trust where distrust is induced? And it's very much a part of success for our building. If we're going to build a cooperative process, and we typically talk about 2 things: numbers and vision, which is really great. That is, here's the vision. If we could all pool our money together, there are 1,000 of us in here, we all pay $100 a month, we got multiple numbers of that, and you can do the numbers and math, and you got the vision. What's missing is when I got to come out of my pocket and put my cash money in, then the issue of trust, me trusting me to keep my commitment and trusting you, comes up. So the key skill for a builder is how do we build trust and rebuild it. And the next one is a healer. And we're not talking metaphorically here. Particularly, we're talking about how do we heal the wounds of oppression that have been passed down my family line, and the wounds that are reignited whenever I see 16 bullets, hands up, don't shoot, and I can't breathe. Both of those sources are sources for old and new wounds, and what we have to become skilled at is how do I let myself know how I got from Big Mama, with all that love, how did I also get some woundedness, okay? Which was part of her adaptation to survive. I ain't putting nobody down. This is about how it came to me so that I then can begin to heal it. All right, so because the first healing is not healing other people, it's healing ourselves and showing the way. So that's warrior, healer, builder. Let's see how much time. Okay, all right. So now, what has that got to do with narratives? Everything. Because part of what's important is for us to look for those kind of narratives, for us to tell those stories. Find in our family line. How many of you know the warrior stories in your family? And I don't mean people who worked hard. I mean folks who actively challenged people, policies, and practices, okay? It's important for all of us to know our warrior stories that have come down our family line. We'll remember the other stories where we have other kind of hurt. Very often we don't know the warrior stories. And many of us got north because we had to hit a white man in the head, okay? And had to leave town. All right, we need to know, but any active challenging of people, policies, or practices becomes warrior stories. You see why we're not talking metaphorically here. Also, where are the builder stories? At our family reunions, do we give the award for the family member who best knits trust among the family? No, we don't, okay? So we're literally talking about what are those stories? And how, there are many different ways to do this. We have a school, we teach middle school and high school students as well as adults. What's key for all of our students, middle school or high school, is something called our Family Lure Project. Nobody, I'm sorry, no matter what grade you're in, you have to go through this process. And that is, you're assigned to find examples of family writing. Any examples. I don't care if it was a Facebook post or a love letter, okay, that grandmama wrote. Your family or extended family. You have to begin to bring that in and then put it into categories, whatever category of genre of literature it goes in, all right? And then specifically then you're asked to look for different things, like you may be asked to interview for proverbs or family stories or fight back stories or whatever, and you put that stash there, and then every 2 months our language arts instructors ask you to go to your stash, pull out something, reflect on it, or analyze it based on the category of literature that it's in. And every student, by February, we will produce a hardbound book for every single student of their family lore, along with their analysis and reflection of it, okay? Now that's what I'm talking about, producing narratives. We also are doing what's a key part of the healing, and that is how do we heal alienation, okay? Alienation is a key part of white supremacy, all right? And everything is directed toward alienation and authenticity. All right, I got my clock here. All right, now quickly in the last 30 seconds. There's an alien in our river. What keeps us together is our touching each other, whether that's physical touching or how we communicate. From our African perspective, the human being is an object of praise from birth to death, okay? That is not so in this environment. This alien has, if I do something wrong, then it's proof that I am wrong. This notion that we are wrong has to be taken out of our communication and out of our narratives. And part of that comes from a process called the River of Touches. I love y'all.
Wakessa, so could you repeat your three things you would have us do? Your three things?
One I didn't get to. All right, so part of what's important is that we learn to tell our stories from the inside out. And part of that is taking that Warrior Hill or Builder model. And the other is learning how many times we've been trained to tell our own story from the outside in. Yeah. We got to tell our stories from the inside out. So that's number one. The other is, along with, to help us with emotional emancipation, is emotional authenticity, okay? That is, we have been trained, I'll give you a quick example. As a man, growing up, if I ask a beautiful sister, I'm 16, I get up the nerve to ask her for a telephone number, she says no. Emotionally, I'm actually feeling sad and scared maybe. What's going to come out, what I'm going to feel and what I'm going to respond to is as if I'm feeling angry and she'll become so many bees. That sets a whole narrative of how we're going to be together, okay? And so emotional authenticity then creates another kind of a communicative narrative. That's number two. And the other one is, you'll have to ask me about it, there's the Araminta Warrior Hill Builder Story national campaign where we are taking charge of Araminta's narrative in the minds of our community. That's what I think we ought to do.
If you had one action for 2017, your choice?
One action for 2017. Yeah, it would be for you to join us and create your own process in it of us taking charge of Araminta's narrative, given 2020 is when she may come out, when that $20 bill may come out. The practice of us controlling her narrative in our communities gives us practice in terms of narrative making on a broad scale and a wide scale.
Thank you. Karen?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me in this mic? Changing our narratives. Blacks are inferior and whites are superior, period. This is the narrative that you will believe if you do not have a true knowledge of self and if you do not have knowledge of this white supremacist system that institutionally creates that narrative. And even you still, even if you understand how we are criminalized, if you understand the school to prison pipeline, if you understand the unequal education, if you understand the wealth disparities, if you understand all of the symptoms of white supremacy, even you yourself may still struggle with feeling inferior when we are repeatedly seeing the images through the propaganda and the programming that we see that perpetuates that narrative, and that's the media. Is it any wonder that 96% of the world's media is owned by 6 corporations? 96% of the world's media is owned by 6 corporations, and none of those owners and CEOs look like anybody in this room. What does that mean? That means that what we see of other people, our other people, is told by them. How we view each other is told by them. And even with those 96% of the media, that includes a lot of our black media. What you think is black owned oftentimes is not black owned. Bad Boy Records is not black owned. BET is not black owned. Ebony Magazine is not black owned. The Roots online publication is not black owned. So what does that mean, you guys? We control none of the narrative of how we view ourselves. I mean, I think it was brilliant how Dr. Cook broke that down this morning about Tarzan, but you guys, that's a drop in the bucket for what we see. What they tell us to care about, it comes from them. How we view each other, how the elders view the youth, how the youth view the elders, how we view Africans, how Africans view us, it all is transpired through their medium. I'll give you an example. We all saw it recently here in America with the Oscars. We were so upset and we were mad because we were so unrepresented on their platform for their award show with the Oscars. And historically, when we are shown in, with their award shows, it's in a very stereotypical manner. And then a lot of actors in Hollywood are still struggling and fighting to not be portrayed in that stereotypical manner. But that's when we're honored, that's when we're awarded over there. But what does that mean, you guys? That means that it shapes our concepts of everything. It shapes our concepts of womanhood and manhood, family, love, standards of beauty. It shapes our concepts of how we view Africa prior to invaders. It also shapes our concepts of the reality of black people as a collective here in this country, showing us oftentimes our symptoms without showing us the problem, and that's the problem of white supremacy. So it keeps us all confused, you guys. But I'm going to say this quote, and I wrote it down. With every obstacle and challenge that we face in this system, it is our duty and our obligation to our ancestors to struggle for a solution. I'm going to repeat that again because we're all up here on this panel in different capacities and avenues, but this is for everyone. With every obstacle and challenge that we face in this system, it is our duty and our obligation to our ancestors to struggle for a solution, which is why we're all here today in this room. So what are some possible solutions? We are at a pivotal point right now pertaining to media. Right now, you still have Hollywood execs, major corporations still trying to figure out how they can transition into a larger platform, and that's the internet. You have corporations who used to put most of their advertising money into commercials, billboards, and so forth. They're now taking a lot of their advertising dollars and they're putting it on the internet. And not just as commercials, but they are finding different YouTubers and finding different online personalities to put the products into their hands so that they could still sell their products. Why? Because this is becoming more of a viable way to advertise and to market as opposed to the older way, which is television. For example, I myself, I don't even own a TV. You see what I'm saying? So we're at a very pivotal time right now with this online platform to be able to tell our stories that get shut out. So looking at some of the advantages with this, some of the advantages, by us capitalizing on this right now is our reach, one. According to the Nelson rating, and that's the rating that they use to see the daily viewership of television, according to the Nelson rating, some of the more popular black shows have a daily viewership. I'll just give you an example. Real Housewives of Atlanta. Don't act like y'all don't watch that show. Real Housewives of Atlanta, 2.8 million. That's on at any given time. I think that was at their 8 o'clock time slot. So at their first time slot, Real Housewives of Atlanta, 2.8 million. Love and Hip Hop, 3.3 million. Empire, act like y'all don't watch some of that. Empire has a really high rating. It's 12.5 million. Now, but where am I going with this? Looking at this online platform, you guys, where we have an opportunity to jump in to begin to tell our stories from our perspectives, YouTube has over 1.3 billion viewers daily, watching over 4.9 billion videos daily. Now, I'm not saying that you will reach everybody on YouTube, but what I'm saying is that you do have access to put our content and what we want to show in front of an available 1.3 billion viewers. And this, you guys, we have the advantage because we're not bounded by a region or a nation. We can reach a global audience. We can reach an international audience. Another advantage with this online access with our narrative is the cost. Hollywood movies or even online platforms like Netflix, Hulu, they spend anywhere from hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars for original content, creating content. Today, there is a growing popularity with personality videos. Does anybody in here watch YouTube videos and you see personality videos? People who just speaking and talking on a subject about whatever you want to look at. It's a growing popularity with personality videos. As a matter of fact, certain corporations in Hollywood are paying people to be YouTube personalities. Not just to put their products in their hand, but they're paying them to go out there and create these personality videos so that they can tell a whatever message. But it's a growing popularity. And with that, this audience is, not only are they more forgiving with how it looks, but they prefer more of the grassroots home video type videos. So what does that mean for us? How can we capitalize on that and take an advantage of it? That means that literally, and I kid you not, I have a black bag over there and I have this laptop. Everything that I'm carrying on me today could be used to create content with quality, online quality, to tell our stories. And that could be anything, you guys. That can be from traveling videos, teaching videos, cooking videos, anything that's going to tell our story from our perspective and begin to shed light on who we are. And I'll just go through a list. The content that I could use is like my iPhone, my laptop, a small creative team, especially youngsters who already are knowledgeable about this platform to help tell our stories. And I'll read this and I'll say why this is important to me. All propaganda is not bad propaganda. We must utilize this new, relatively inexpensive platform to create our own propaganda that will help eradicate and dispel the myths, biases, and lies that have been institutionally created pertaining to blacks in Africa and throughout the diaspora for the purpose of white domination. This is our chance to reach a wide audience with our narrative. We must do this with a very specific agenda, which is to create unity amongst Africans globally, raise our collective consciousness and awareness about this system, instill pride in who we are, our accomplishments, and our cultural ways, and lastly, hopefully, help set us on a unified course to change our future. And really briefly, before I go into my solutions, I have a YouTube channel called The Great Griot, if some people don't know, and it's a Black History YouTube channel. And honestly, I created it out of what I'm talking about. I had a computer, I had a camera, I had a green screen, and I honestly said, I love Black history, and I want to find some way for me to give back with what I do, and I created the channel. I mean, I hopped in front of the green screen, I turned my camera on, And I started the channel, and from there it started growing. You know, I have a small team now who help, they research, they script out, but the impact that we make, and we're not even able to yet be consistent with it. So even with being inconsistent, the impact that we're making is that we have Africans who are reaching out who didn't know some of the history about Africa that we're doing. We have people who are reaching out from the Caribbean. We have people who are reaching out, people who are offering now to translate. We have people who are taking this message into their classrooms to begin to teach, and this is high school and college. So just even with us being very inconsistent right now, we're making an impact, and people are starting to understand history, things that they never knew about. And we make a charge to teach history that's outside of the context of what Europeans are used to or okay with us teaching.
So Karen, could we have
Yes.
three?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, so the three solutions I made, one was raising money, and we hear that with everything, but we have to start looking at money going towards this cause the same way, the same way that we do looking at advertising for a business. Most businesses out in Hollywood that he's speaking of, they have PR, they have advertising, and they push their message. We have to do the same thing. We have a platform that's very low cost. We have to start pooling our money for that and creating a narrative, putting a narrative out there that's inexpensive for us. It's our PR campaign. It's our marketing and advertising dollars, and we have to have it. Two is, I'm an advocate for teaching youth and working in schools, and I totally agree that we need our Saturday schools. We need our Saturday schools with how we teach our babies, and with that, we need to start challenging the youth who already use this platform, who are in these Saturday schools, who are learning history, one, and who's learning about this white supremacist system so that when they see our symptoms, they don't blame the symptoms, but look at the root problem. Right, so we need to begin to work with our Saturday school programs if they're out there, or create our own, and those youth need to be the one to go out to tell our stories once they have some type of political education. And lastly, what could we do immediately in 2017? I'll say this really quickly. This seems like a sidebar, but it's not. You guys in this room and abroad, if we don't have something that unifies us as a people, we're going to have a hard time working together collectively. We're going to have a hard time pressing forward with our future. I said that we should look at starting a social media campaign that simply says, I'm African, born in America. I'm African, born in Haiti. I'm African, born in Brazil. I'm African, born in Puerto Rico. I'm African, born in Ghana. I'm African, born in Nigeria. I'm African, I'm African, I'm African. I believe that collectively we have to start unifying ourselves, because what good is it to teach history? What good is it to teach about this system and understanding our common enemy? What good is it to teach that if we don't even see ourselves as one collective? And when we see ourselves as one collective, then it becomes that your struggle is my struggle. Your victory is my victory. So until we get a collective mindset and unify our origin, then it makes sense for us that we are together and that we have one unified future to fight for. So that's my suggestion for 2017, is that we have to start making this push to say that I'm African. We are Africans first, and push that Pan-African mission, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things I'm going to ask us to do while we're here is I know we're short with time here, but spend some time talking with the panelists so that we begin networking and creating more energy and innovation. So at the breaks, make sure we're touching base. If something interested you, touch base, and we can begin building those networks even stronger. What do cows drink? Thank you. Next.
Good morning. I'm African, born in Chicago. Thank you for that. I'm getting that on a t-shirt later today. I love all of the examples and all of the connections that we've been making to media. And as a 45-year-old, I was just in school, in middle school, at the time when computers and technology became a thing. So I think that a generation ahead of me is still a little fearful of what to do with media. I love it, I understand it, and I can see the power of it. I got to take a very quick trip even as an educator, to Ethiopia 3 years ago. And one of the things that to me was most powerful in using media was visiting a factory where women who were sex trafficked were taken out of that industry and were given some skills in order to make scarves. And what everyone on that trip did was, of course, we all had our phones with us. We took pictures of the factory, of the scarves and of the women, and shared it. And what I hadn't realized at the time was that the 10 women that were on the trip with me, and myself included, we had a reach of 25 million people collectively. 10 women, 25 million people were listening to us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram. So when we took pictures of those scarves and said, make sure you buy this for your mother for Mother's Day, or make sure you buy this for your sister, or buy this for yourself, when we went back the next day, the director said, what did you do? We are all sold out. And I have to say that the power of the media in that particular situation, if that meant, and what he had to do was hire 4 more women the next day. If that took 4 women out of sex trafficking and gave them a tangible job, then that was good enough for me. So I'm going to connect that now to my other career as an educator. I have a new baby. It's only 2 months old. It's called being black at school. I have been in the school systems for 23 years. Not a real baby. I'm 45. Did I say that? I'm going to have a grandbaby soon. So after 23 years of teaching and after 10 years of being an administrator, I got to see what that anti-black narrative actually looked like in the public school systems. And what it actually looks like and what it makes me say now are things like this. Brown versus Board of Education did us no favors. What happened at that time in the story that I tell.
I don't see, oh yeah, there it is.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome back from lunch. It looks like we've lost a few folks, but we're going to continue to move forward. So next on the agenda, we have another panel. And we're going to move into our panel discussion, framing session number 3. And the question is, what do we need to do to create our own narrative? And so I'd like to introduce our first panelist. And this is Sarita Gates. Sarita is a culture creator with a focus on hip hop and digital archiving. As founder of the Gates Preserve, she curates innovative experiences like Word is Bomb, a documentary film featuring the never-before-told story about the writers and journalists that created and shaped the language for hip-hop culture, as well as Stay Hungry, a culinary experience that bridges hip-hop and food. Sarita? Yeah. Next we have Cleaver Cruz. Cleaver is a writer, dreamer, lover of travel. He has founded the Black Joy Project in early December of 2015, a creative space that expresses black joy as a form of resistance inside of the work to dismantle the systems, societies, and structures that attempt to take it from us every day. Cruz's work has been featured in African Voices, magazine, Galleria, magazine, and the Dominican Writers Association, among others. He's proud of being black, queer, Latinx, with the understanding that they are parts of a whole. Next, we have Alan Kwabena Frumpong, is one of the organizers of Black Lives Matter in New York City, and a philanthropic strategist and capacity builder through his work with Movement Net Lab, a think, do, learn tank focused on network social movements. One of Alan's current projects is supporting within our lifetime a national movement network of racial justice organizers and healing practitioners as a national network coordinator. He is also an activist member of the Malcolm X grassroots movement. Next, Christy Hagens, Dr. Hagens, is a PhD psychologist and senior associate at the California Institute for Behavioral Health Solutions. She manages projects meant to enhance health equity and improve cultural competence in the treatment of mental health and substance use disorders throughout California. We also have Chantrell Lewis. Chantrell Lewis, a native of New Orleans. She can put a birth date on here, so that's cool. Is a 2014 United Nations Program for People of African Descent Fellow, 2012-13 Andy Warhol Curatorial Fellow, with a BA and MA in African American Studies from Howard University and Temple University, respectively. She's a U.S.-based curator and researcher who travels internationally, reaching diasporic aesthetics, spirituality, and the survival nuances of transactional African diasporan communities. And we have, last but not least, Rukia Lumumba, is a human rights activist, justice strategist, thought leader, and daughter of the late Mayor Chakwi Lumumba and Nubia Lumumba. In a career spanning over 18 years, she has had a rich history of advancing issues and initiatives that elevate the legal, economical, and educational health of individuals, families, and communities. Help me welcome our panelists. Senya, I am so sorry. Zakia Sankora Jabbar is Executive Director of Racial Justice Now, based in Dayton, Ohio, where she works statewide and organizing advocacy and policy on issues that specifically impact Black people in Ohio. And forgive me for forgetting your name. You have a seat down there? Okay. So help me welcome our panelists. So we've asked each one, again, to identify 3 areas, and then we're going to ask for their number 1 priority for 2017. So with that, I'll let you start wherever you want to start. You want to start, Rukia? We'll just start in this end. Okay.
It also happens when you get to sit in the first seat.
Yeah, they all moved over. So.
Right. So thanks, everybody. Thank you for inviting me, the invitation to be here and to share. Again, my name is Rukia Lumumba. I am a native of Jackson, Mississippi, and I say that because what I speak of really has roots there. So one of the ways I believe that we can really frame our narrative, to really take control of our narrative, is to really engage in what I consider self-determination. And that comes from, digging deeper into the legacy of our ancestors. I had a little PowerPoint to show, but we don't need to go through that. I just like to speak with some images behind so that we can just reflect. But one of the reasons I reflect is because when we go back to our ancestors and our legacy, I think about my parents, Chokwe and Nubia Lumumba, who have passed on before me. And they moved us to Jackson, Mississippi with this dream of creating a new community, a community that allowed us to have self-determination, control over our lives, control over the resources that help us produce what we need to not only strive, not only live and be sustained, but to thrive. And so I start by telling this story. I think of them first, and I call them into the room. And I also call, people like the great Fannie Lou Hamer into the room, who was doing and creating systems of self-determination way before many people. And I think about our ancestors who traveled across those long-distance waters to be here, and though they were snatched from their continent, their home, and brought here, they continued to fight, and that's why we're here today. And they also created a narrative that I think that we have to continue to tell their stories as well. And so I say all of that to say that I start with telling this one story, right, which is a narrative that I like to tell about self-determination, and it's the story of the Republic of New Africa when they first began to journey to Jackson, Mississippi. And it's the story of where that slogan, Free the Land, came from, if you've ever heard of it. So it was in about the year 1972, I believe. I may have the year a little wrong because I normally have it in front of me. And a group of 500 young men, women, children, elders were also with them, were driving down this road to land in what was then Edwards, Mississippi. And they had all purchased this land collectively. And they were driving to this land, which they had named El Hajj Malik, after Malcolm X. And as they were driving down this road, they reached a barricade. And this barricade was a barricade of police officers, then federal agents, and then behind the federal agents, the Ku Klux Klan. And so as they approached this barricade, it was a caravan of cars, of over 500 people in these cars. As they approached this barricade, my father was one of those young men that was with them, and he got out the car, and he walked up to the officers with his comrades with him. And he says, when he tells the story, he used to say that I walked up knowing that we weren't going to turn around. I walked up knowing that we had come to touch this ground and we weren't in the mood to turn around, so we were prepared to do what we had to do. So we walked up praying. We walked up praying to God that somehow we wouldn't have to do anything that would require us to lose our lives, but that we would be allowed to touch this land, because this was our goal. So he says that he walks up, and as soon as he walks up, the officer says, there ain't gonna be no land celebration here today. And he turns to the officer and he says, well, these folks here ain't leaving. So if there's not a land celebration today, then we are going to have another issue today. The officer turns around and he looks at the other officers. And all of a sudden, my father says it was like the Red Sea, that the barricade just began to split open. And the officers and the Ku Klux Klan and the federal agents pushed aside, and the 500 folks, the caravan of folks, passed through. And when they got to the land, the folks were so excited to touch that ground that they started eating the dirt. And that's where the saying, free the land, came from. They say, free the land. Free the land. You repeat, free the land.
Free the land.
Free the land.
Free the land.
And as we say in the Malcolm X grassroots movement, by any means necessary. And we say that because we believe that land is the basis of all independence. When we have control over our resources, over our land, when we have control over the very spaces that we live, when we have what we call local control as well, control over our government entities, then we really have control over our lives, and we began to really control our narratives. And so I won't go into all of the other 3 reasons that I actually had 5. I didn't pay attention and listen, but I had 5 other things of ways that we can tell our narratives. But the first one, in the interest of time, I'll move on. The first one is self-determination and the maintenance of our own control over our governments, our localities, and our own land. So thank you.
It's so hard to sit here and listen. You want to continue to listen because the powers and wisdom is so deep. And so I would encourage you to just reflect on the things that we're hearing about, not just today, but take these with you. Thank you. Can we go next? Yeah, okay.
Good afternoon. Hello? Great. Again, my name is Sarita Gates. First, I'd like to say thank you, for you all could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we definitely appreciate that. I created a company called the Gates Preserve. Preserve for a few reasons. 1, because my family is from down south, and 2, because I am committed to preserving Black culture. And Gates because, shout out to my mom. Her last name is Gates. And inside of the Gates Preserve, what we do is bring the innovation back into hip hop. And so thus far, we do that in three particular ways that has everything to do with reframing our narratives. One is a documentary called Word is Bond. Word is bond. In the beginning was the word. And what Word is Bond will do in the world is basically highlight the writers and journalists that have created the narrative for the culture. So if it wasn't for a woman named Dream Hampton, what we think about the artist Jay-Z would be drastically different. If it wasn't for Greg Tate, we probably wouldn't have any language at all for hip-hop culture, and so on and so forth. So that is one way in which I am doing that. Another project is Stay Hungry, in which we bridge the gap between hip-hop and food. So Biggie Smalls has a classic line, I have a T-bone steak, cheese, eggs, and Welch's grape. And so what we do is we partner with young people, and we partner with chefs, and the young people make those hip-hop lyrics. And the third is digital archiving, which has everything to do with Word is Bond. The reason why I started Word is Bond was because I could not find their articles online. And so I was born in '88. Shout out to '88, great day. And yeah, hip hop was real amazing in '88. Shout out to Rakim and all of the brilliant people who put out amazing albums. But I mentioned that because when magazines such as The Source, Vibe, Ego Trip, etc. were in their heyday, I was not reading magazines. I was reading highlights. And so I say that to say, when I became an adult and I wanted to find out more about like who tells the story of the journalist when they're the ones telling everyone else's story, I had no space to do that. Like I could Google, and I'm the Google queen. I Google everything, and I could not find the classic source issues. I couldn't find Vibe magazine. I couldn't find Ego Trip, etc. So I decided to find the magazines, which was a struggle in itself, and digitally archive them so everybody has a space in which they can get all the knowledge from these platforms. And so these three projects remind me, and I want to remind us, that we have the power to shape language and the narrative anytime and often as we want. And with all the platforms that we have available, whether it's Instagram or Medium or Storyfy or Twitter or Snapchat, or insert your favorite medium here, we can all reshape our narratives literally anytime we want. So shout out to those taking pictures. You are now reimagining the narrative as we speak. And those taking notes, you are currently reimagining the narrative. So I say all of those things to just remind us that as we create content in the world, we are constantly reshaping and reimagining the narrative. Thank you. Oh, yes, my apologies. Action, all about action. So one thing I challenge us all to do is to find a Black subject and to create a language for it on Wikipedia specifically. I'm not gonna give you all the numbers, but African Americans are not, and people of color are not represented on Wikipedia by any means. So that means those that are putting the content on Wikipedia that we Google do not look like us. And it's a problem that we can change because anybody can literally go on Wikipedia and upload something. So again, my action to us all is to get a subject that we are passionate about, that we are interested in, and create a Wikipedia page for that person, whether it's your grandmother, your aunt, etc.
Peace. Again, my name is Cleaver Cruz. Thank you. I've been here since yesterday in the afternoon. It's been really amazing to be a part of this space and this community and hear some really brilliant ideas of the ways that we can continue to redefine or recreate or create our narratives. It's been really inspiring, so I just want to say thank you for that. It's been great to be a witness. To tell a little bit about myself, I'm a many things, but the thing I've been claiming or working on claiming most recently is being a writer. Because for me, I write any combination of words to tell the stories that didn't exist when I needed them the most. And that's why this resonated a lot with me, this gathering around this idea of recreating a narrative. But interesting, inside of writing, the actual reason I got invited here is a project that I started almost a year ago called the Black Joy Project on Instagram, which started one morning where woke up really sad. I was feeling really heavy, depression, to be honest. And I was sitting there in my bed trying to figure out, how do I work through this sadness? How do I actually get out of my bed? What is gonna allow me to get out of my bed? And I started thinking about these experiences of joy that I had. I'm also a member of the BLM chapter in New York City, and that chapter, along with my friends and my family, have really shown me some powerful ways of us enjoying each other's presence. And these moments of us taking, not a break, but knowing that inside of our work, we had to have a moment of just chilling. Like, let's watch a movie, or let's dance a little bit together. Let's have some way of recharging ourselves, was the way I was experiencing joy with that group of people. So I remembered this picture of my mom that I put up, that I had taken of her a couple weeks before, and her saying how much she loved it. And I loved her in that picture because she was smiling so much. So I posted on Facebook with a call to action, basically, saying, let's bombard the internet with joy. That joy is a form of resistance inside of this work that we're doing. And that as we're also sharing these tragic videos and articles that are really important for us to see and understand, we can also hold that joy as a necessity. And that I wasn't making this up. This is history, right? If we look throughout, now I know of 250,000 years of history, joy has been very much a part of that history. That we've always figured out a way to celebrate ourselves, to take a moment and say that we are magnificent, that we are a great people. And so for me, I wanted to figure out, how do I actually use that actively as a form of resistance? So I told myself that I'll have a 30-day challenge to work through my personal grief and to see what happens on the other side of that. So for 2 weeks, every single day, I posted a picture of my friends or a family member, showing them, saying, like, these are people that are smiling, that look like us. And after 2 weeks, people started sending me messages. They're like, one person said, I woke up from a terrible nightmare, and it was seeing your image, your post, that allowed me to calm down, to go to sleep. So these kind of messages started coming to me unsolicited. So then I called Sarita, and I said, I think I have to turn this into something more formal. So it became the Black Joy Project about 2 weeks later. And now it's been about 8 months of traveling from Paris to San Francisco to New Orleans, anywhere that I've been in the last 8 months, and talking to people about what is their experience of joy. How are they experiencing Black joy? And sharing that, because my intention was that now we can have, similar to what Sarita was saying about archiving, is that now there's a corner on the internet that when we are feeling any kind of way, that we might need a certain kind of uplift, that you can go and see someone that looks like you, that's actually enjoying themselves, and not just enjoying it, but articulating what that joy means to them. And that's been really powerful and really beautiful to see that. Also, my intention was to complicate Blackness inside of this expression. So my family comes from the Dominican Republic, which is a whole other thing around Blackness. But I just felt like it's really important for us inside of these conversations when we're talking about Black folks or of African descent people, that we understand the complexity of that. And that when I'm saying Black lives, I'm talking about all of the Black lives. That means queer folks, that means trans folks, that means anyone that is identifying as being a person of African descent needs to be represented and seen. Because often we can talk about it, but are we actually seeing each other? That's another thing I've heard in the last 2 days about us seeing each other. So it's really important for me to be able to create that space, because I needed to see myself. Like I said, I write the stories that didn't exist when I needed them the most. And that in this case, I needed to share the images that I wasn't necessarily seeing either, without making it sensational. Like, that is the truth. These are the people that are on that account, but nowhere does it say that element of their identity. It's just a fact. That's who they are. In terms of my suggestions, naturally, one of the things I think would be great is to continue to create spaces of joy and reprieve with an element of political education. So a couple of weeks ago, I was able to collaborate with the Black Lives Matter chapter in New York for the Afropunk Festival, where I brought in my friend who's a photographer to create a Black Joy station, a Black Joy photo station, where he took portraits of over almost 400 people in 2 days, while we were educating them on what our chapter was doing, so that people were getting a moment to see themselves, reflect, and enjoy that moment of taking a picture, but also learning about important things like in New York City, 92% of the people that were arrested last year were people of color. The majority of the arrests in New York City last year was for jumping a turnstile to get into the subway, and 92% of those people look like us. And so it was important for us, while someone's standing on the line to get their picture taken, to understand that it's within your right to offer a swipe to someone while they're getting on the train so that they don't get arrested or avoid having any interaction with the police that day. So I think it would be great for us to continue to create those spaces where we can enjoy ourselves while politically educating one another. And it exists right here in DC. So the BLM chapter in DC has a regular event called Black Joy Sunday. So those kinds of things are already existing in our space, and I really encourage you all to continue to do that. Another one is, I think it would be awesome if we can set up microphones with speakers in front of the homes or the offices of key political leaders, so that people are having a moment to really share their demands, whatever it is that they need to say to those people, in a way that they cannot ignore us. And I got that from an experience I had last year where a couple of organizing groups in New York City went to the home of the DA of the Bronx with a coffin that had the names of people that were killed by the state in the last 20 years. And we knocked on their door and we stayed there until somebody answered and left a few gifts on their lawn. But the idea that we can't be ignored, and if we have a microphone, who's not going to listen? The last thing, as I was saying earlier, I think it's important for us to be really intentional about language. That when we're talking about we're standing up for all Black people or everyone of African descent, that we actually know what that means. That when I'm saying those and the comrades that I have in my world, we're talking also about sex workers, about incarcerated people, about trans people, about homeless people, and not just the ones that we're seeing as acceptable or the ones that we want to take pictures of, but that when we're saying all Black people, we actually mean all Black people, because everyone's life is important. And then lastly, my proposed action, which may not be that simple, but I think it would be great, is having some kind of visual wheat pasting or poster campaign. So one idea I got from this portrait series I'm doing now with the Black Joy Project would be to print those images and go to these Black neighborhoods, go to the neighborhoods where we mostly reside, so that you don't have to go to a gallery. You're seeing on your buildings or wherever you're residing these images of Black joy, so that when you walk out in that same thought of, am I gonna make it? Am I gonna be hurt today? That you also see something that looks like you, that's telling you that you can smile, that it's okay to smile, and that's not a contradiction in the work that you're doing. Thank you.
I'm amazed as I'm listening to these panelists, and Rakia talked about reflection and the importance of stepping back and allowing things to absorb and just thinking. And we're so busy sometimes we don't do that. And with all the technology, but reflection is a key piece. My sister, Sarita, talked about the power in words, and I think Cleaver's also mentioned the power of our words and the importance of what we speak and how it impacts us. But this thing about joy, you know, the fruit of the Spirit is love, it's joy and peace. And that is something I think that we have, and when I think about just the importance of that from joy, the importance of who we are looking for. And I'm smiling here because I'm hearing from the mouth of babes where I sit, born in the year 78, 88, and so from I hear this youth, and they're speaking about things that we've lost. And there is a joy that I hear and I feel in this. So, you know, as we think about where we're going, let's take time to reflect. Think about the power of our words and really the joy that we bring. And you said something about enjoying one another's presence. I mean, we need to get to a place where we just enjoy being with each other. So I'm appreciative of our youth and the reminders that they bring to us, but thank you for that. And so enough for the editorial comments, but now, Alan?
Thank you, Medasi. So shout out to Ghana. I see Esther waving her hand. It's good to get the connection there, the transnational connection. So my name is Alan Kwabena Frimpong, born in Newark, New Jersey. Parents came here from Ghana and West Africa in 1980. I was born in 1984. I'm a son, I'm a nephew of an uncle who is a chief in Krokrobite in Ghana, right outside of the capital in Accra. And when I think about myself and what I represent and who I am in my lineage, given that my uncle is a chief, and thank you, Rukia, for calling out the importance of self-determination, we're really thinking about the role of people in our community, in our diaspora, in our lineage, in our history, and her story, our queen mothers and chiefs are really caretakers of the land. And so when I see myself as a part of that lineage, I consider myself a caretaker of land, which means I'm a caretaker of families. I'm a caretaker of the families of the people who are on this panel with me, the connections that I've made with them over the past 10 years that would result in us carrying the legacy of our forefathers and our foremothers like Chokwe Lumumba. To have a movement like Black Lives Matter, where 2 years ago we would have never thought that I would have connected with Cleaver Cruz, because he went on a bus to Ferguson to be in solidarity with another community of families who were grieving and mourning the loss of yet another unarmed Black person. Just 2 weeks before, we were dealing with the grief of the murder of Eric Garner right in our backyard in New York City. And so when we talk about the role of ourselves as chiefs and queen mothers, what does it mean for us to take responsibility and ownership with urgency, compassion, and love, to be able to say that we deserve, it is a right to be able to protect our people? And for me, it calls into my spirit the role that I get to play as a chief, and as a chief who mobilizes resources for movement, and the kind of political power that plays in us being able to be self-determined to build our own cooperative economics, to be able to self-organize our own resources. So that ride to Ferguson would have not happened if people didn't take the initiative and the opportunity to self-organize $20,000 in less than 2 weeks to get people from the New York City metropolitan area, including New York, Philly, and Jersey, to Ferguson. And the week before that, building with organizations like Organization for Black Struggle and more, Missourians for Organizing Reform and Empowerment. And of course, that initial touch point on August 28th when we went on that ride, there were a lot of successes, there were a lot of mistakes made, there were a lot of challenges, but it actually opened up a door and an opportunity for us to reimagine in 2014 as young people who believed in self-determination, what it meant for us to transform and change communities across the United States to affirm that Black Lives Matter. And to say that affirmation every day, because for the past over 400 years, and you were just talking about the legacy of Black people in this universe, like beyond 400 years, right? That every single time that we affirm our own lives by being able to create and reimagine, it is actually just an indication of our political power. And so for the people in this room who are connected to each other, that brought themselves to this room at this time, I want you to think about just the simple things about how you're connected to the people who are here and how you got here, and your presence to be able to listen to the people who are on this panel and how this panel was even organized. All of these things require mobilization of resources. Even the mics that we're speaking on, somebody paid for them. Somebody paid for the chairs that we're sitting on. Somebody had to think about the resources that it took for us to orchestrate a panel and a discussion to talk about how to change the narrative of our people so that we continue to affirm in the midst of traumatic situations of crisis that simply we matter. And the conversation about mattering is actually just saying that we are enough, we are worthy, we are loving, we are compassionate, and we actually deserve to grieve, we deserve to mourn, we deserve to be angry. All of those things, we get to experience ourselves with a full range of emotions, right? Because at the end of the day, we're human. And when you live in a country and when you live in a world with the kind of history that's been laid out throughout the 2 days that says that you don't matter and you're not worthy, you actually do need that affirmation. And you need it not only from yourself, but from your own people. So in terms of being able to mobilize resources in those moments, if you don't believe that it's possible, if you don't believe that it's possible that you can change the economic situations, to be able to change the political situations in your community, that you actually have a voice, that you could actually change what happens on your block, that's a conversation about mattering. If you can't mobilize the resources to say, hey, somebody can't pay their rent this month, that's a conversation about mattering. When I think about the Black Panthers and God, God bless them, because if Dhoruba bin Wahad didn't enter into my life 12 years ago, again, I wouldn't even be on this panel with y'all. And so when I think about the free breakfast program, like, seriously, like when I hear him talk about the stories of how they walked up to the grocery store, and it wasn't even a matter of like saying, oh, can you donate these groceries? It was like, we get to have these groceries, this food that you have, because we know you're gonna throw it out the next day. So it's just a matter of you giving it to us so that it can be reallocated and repurposed for people who actually get to have it because they're hungry. And if you don't do it, something just may happen to your grocery store by tomorrow. It may not exist. I don't know. But tactics, right? By any means necessary. And if that's the case, right, to make sure that people get some food on the table, then that's what we get to do. And so, I leave with this in terms of actions. When I think of the opportunity to be able to mobilize resources, and I'm not just talking just money, right? I'm talking about material resources, our gifts and our strengths. One of the things that I would love to see happen, even if it was before we left this panel today or when you're in your deliberations, to find out what are your superpowers? What are you good at? Just within your groups as you're deliberating, and to find one another to see what is it that we can exchange and barter, and see how we can support each other with what's going on in our lives. We all know we got that one area in our lives where it's like, dang, we just struggling right here, right? It's a struggle. We need support. If that could happen just right now in this room through the connections that we all have, like that's dope in and of itself. The second point is, Cleaver just talked about one of our campaigns in New York City, like Swipe It Forward. And it's really just a simple action. And we're here in Washington, D.C. If you see somebody as you walk out of here and you're taking public transportation and they need to get on the metro to get home and you have the resources, support them. Right? We got to think about the belief systems that we have that would not have us do that, that would have us detach from our people and look at them as abject from ourselves. When we look into them, we're actually looking at us. And when we actually make those beliefs around separating ourselves from them, it's actually a conversation about what we feel about ourselves internally deep inside. It's about the resentment, actually, that we have of our own people. And then when we see them as ourselves, it's really a conversation about anti-Blackness because it's all the self-hate that we have about ourselves. And so, like, where is it that we get to ask those questions so that we put ourselves in the process around our own healing and really our own journey of liberation? And my third one, if I had an action, I always go for like the big one, right? I always go for like the big one that's like the Save the World one. If we could have a global action, like a mass strike to divest from state systems that continue to just screw our people over every day, and just start with institutions of policing and mass incarceration, including all of the corporations that funnel that money into those institutions, that would be so dope. Like St. Louis alone, Purina Pet Care, Nestle, Motorola, the Bradley Group. All of these companies are companies that support the St. Louis Police Foundation. And so what if? So I'll leave you with that. And thank you, Medase.
Again, it's so hard to hear the wisdom coming here, but the thing that brother really impacted me with is if you see someone on a train and just reaching out. It's hard for me to walk the streets and not see the faces that are begging on these streets and to ignore them. I think it's a travesty. So I think one is, how do we recognize those who are less than and need our help? And that's that they're less than us, but they have less right now. How can we share? But the other thing you mentioned also I'm hearing is networking. That's what businesses do, global organizations. They network, they use their resources. And how do we do that? So, thank you. Dr. Hagan?
Hi, what an honor it is to be here in this panel in the presence of all of you. It's been a pleasure the last day and a half to be a part of this summit. To tell you a little bit about me and my background, I'm a psychologist by training, connected with the Association of Black Psychologists and mentored by Linda James Myers, my good friend now, right? And I work for an agency called CIBHS, or the California Institute for Behavioral Health Solutions. And what I do there, it's an agency, it's a nonprofit that does mental health and substance use disorder training, evaluation, research work, policy work, statewide. And the team that I work on, the particular focus is health equity, so cultural competence, reducing disparities. And one of the opportunities that I've had being there the past 4 years has been really looking at community-defined practices, so things that ethnic and cultural communities of color know work for them, but that maybe larger agency systems don't necessarily recognize. And so we've been kind of pushing this work in California and had an opportunity to choose a particular practice that we wanted to implement in California. And so about a year and a half ago, I had a chance to become trained as an Emotional Emancipation Circle, EEC, facilitator. At that point, it was about a half-day training, but I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is it. And so at that point, kind of began to look at how can we bring this to California and how can I help in whatever way that I can to make this happen. And so given the history that I had, some of the connections, I began to just reach out to the folks that I knew in ABSI, to Enolan, to CHN, and my colleagues at CIBHS. And so we were able to develop a MOU, to have a contract, be funded by the Department of Healthcare Services in California to do what I just said. And so CPI, or the California Professional Initiative, is what we're calling it, of the work that's happening in California with the EECs, was born in September, so about a year ago, 2016. And what resulted in that was the extended training protocol, for it's now 2.5 days, needed a little bit more bulk to it, added booster training sessions so that folks who were trained as facilitators could begin to deepen their understanding of how to facilitate, added consultation calls each month, kind of individual support and technical assistance, if you will, for teams. And ended up training over the past year about 55 or so facilitator participants and having 11 teams that are facilitating circles in San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Sacramento. Part of the purpose as well was we use a model, it's called a community development team model, but was definitely to have this done and the circles kind of happening in California to help them be sustainable so that they can continue, to ensure fidelity so that people are really kind of doing what the circles say they're supposed to do. But also a really significant part was to gather information, feedback data about the effectiveness of talking about this work. And so I am pleased to say that we are looking at our preliminary data, and as we would expect, they're working. They are working. People are being changed and transformed by a result of sitting in circles like we have been talking about issues of importance. So the background, as you all know, I'm not going to say a whole lot about the challenge because I think we all know it, it's been well defined, is that we've become disconnected from our true selves. We are lost, we are confused, and that's resulting in all of what we are seeing around us in many ways in our society and our environment with people of African ancestry. So substance abuse, violence in relationships and with each other, crime, self-hate, materialism, all of those things. And so we also need to understand, and which is very clear too, that Western psychology has done its fair share and job of providing inaccurate data and support and practices that have been racist and unacceptable to kind of who we are as people. And so I don't even need to cite Freud's comments and Jung, who talked about, but I will, Carl Jung, who talked about that certain psychological maladies that we experience, that white Americans experience, were due to the presence of black people in America, right? That G. Stanley Hall, who was the founding father of APA, and when we think about him, he reached adulthood before slavery was abolished. So he internalized all the stuff, the myths about racial inferiority, stupidity, laziness, and so forth. And so one of his comments, just again, perspective of APA, which still is very strong today, that he believed that no two races differed in their physical and psychological traits, as did the Caucasian and the African. And he considered black people to be in a stage of incomplete growth. So when we think about, again, the history of what we know to be true, when we think about psychology and some of the ways that we've been encouraged to take care of ourselves, they've not been in our best interest. So we've been lost, and it's time for us to come back home, back to our ancient, our true selves. I had an opportunity to go to Egypt less than 2 weeks ago. I've been back, and it was incredible and amazing. It gave me insight into what's possible, about how good God is, and how capable we are. To see the temples, to see the pyramids, to talk with the Nubian people, it became very clear to me who we are and what's possible. So my 3 suggestions. A phrase that we might be very familiar with is self-knowledge is the basis of all knowledge. So we have to kind of begin to understand who we are. We have to be motivated internally, that spark, that personalization of what is this to me and how is it important to me. We have to recognize that we are spirit first in this material form, and there's so much more than all the material things that we see in the world. The title, the degree, the house, the car, so what? Means nothing in reality. And we have to be willing to talk the real talk and recognize that our ancient ancestors' psyche really means soul, study of the soul. So that is what we are talking about. All of this, Linda reminded me, this is not new thought. This is ancient Egyptian, African wisdoms. Our ancestors knew, and we have to remember. My second is we have to engage the community, the tribe, the family. We are community people. So having gatherings like this, big gatherings, small gatherings, intersections, working collectively on this work is incredibly important. Reduces our isolation, it improves our relationships with each other, it supports the collective mental liberation of our people, and it's important that we have sacred, safe spaces just for us, just for us. Our feedback from some of our participants has been that one person said in particular, I feel when I come into a circle, the very first time they come, as though I've been welcomed back home by a family member. So how can we create environments and spaces where that happens? My third recommendation is very related to what I just said. In those places where we come together, whether it's officially in EECs or other spaces, that we've got to cross-pollinate in some ways, as well as have our own spaces. So how amazing it is to have youth sit together and talk about youth issues, to have elders sit together and talk about those issues, men, women, and then the amazing synergy that happens when we come together and then we share and learn from each other. I've got 2 teen girls, 15 and 16. I've got a mother who's 85 years old. I've got nieces and nephews who are in their mid-20s. We got to hit this at all fronts, everywhere. My final comment, my recommendation as a psychologist would be for that one action item is self-care. Ongoing self-care. That this work is hard, it is challenging, it's a long road. And so we have got to take care of ourselves, we've got to take care of each other. Someone said earlier self-care is revolutionary, and I believe in that. So let's focus on gratitude, on joy, let's work out, let's get rest, let's eat right, let's say no, let's ask for help when we need it, and focus on what's going right, and our strengths, and less on the lies, and less on the negative, and connecting with who we really are. So I have a couple more quick comments. One is, in being transformed, we are returning to hear the divinity in ourselves and to recognize ancient African truths that the fundamental nature of human nature is God and is divine. So, as Bob Marley said, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Chantrell?
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Hi, everybody. I know it's after lunch. We have itis and all that, but yeah, we need to lively up ourselves as well. Didn't Bob Marley say that? Lively up ourselves. Yes, let's lively up. Can we stand up real quick? Just stretch. Yeah, we're going live. No, you don't have to. All right, that's it. I just want y'all to stand up, stretch. All right, great, because we need that sometimes. Serious work. So I want to start off by saying Mafedafun Egum, Mafedafun Alegba, Mafedafun Shango, Mafedafun Bobo Arisha, Mafedafun every ancestor of every single individual sitting in this room. I am Chantrell P. Lewis. I am a daughter of New Orleans. I am a priest of Shango. I am a Lukumi initiate. I'm an African-centered curator and scholar and researcher and filmmaker, and I'm so very happy to be here with you all. I want to thank Enola and Cheryl for this hard work and putting this conference together. I want to thank my comrades for asking me to be here. I want to thank Rakia, her father, Ibaye, Chokwe, Lumumba, whose work, through the people whose lives he touched, not only including my own, but like indirectly, directly, he had a huge influence on my life. And so I have to acknowledge that in this moment. There's so much. My mind is like all over the place. But I'm gonna try to make this as concise as possible. When we're talking about narrative, the first thing we need to do is discuss accessibility, right? Because what we're doing right now is preaching to the choir. Everything that we're saying on this panel and every single panel that you all have been on, we have, for the most part, have heard before. Plenty of times, either you shared the information yourself, you've heard it before, because right now we're in a circle of like similarity, right? Like-minded people. We have got to create accessibility for all people to be in these rooms and these conversations. So for the people who need it the most, that they can receive this information, because if not, we're just preaching to ourselves, right? That's like very, very important. So when my education started, like reading a book, a sister, and I can't think of her name right now, but she wrote a book, and it was like children's stories, and she's based here in DC. She's an attorney. It was called Stolen Legacy. I don't know if anyone knows the sister who wrote that. Yes, that's who it is. I read about the Haitian Revolution in that book as a 5-year-old. I don't remember reading those stories like about Cinque and all of these like insurrections, and that stayed with me for like the rest. Like every single thing I did was about my people. My parents weren't African-centered. They weren't cultural nationalists, but they were pro-black. So Santa Claus and Christmas in New Orleans was black. The angels black. My books black. Everything was black, right? And my mama didn't need to identify as a feminist, and they didn't have to have me in dashikis and everything for me to understand who I was. But they put books in my hands that represented stories that looked like me. And so when I was going into predominantly white elementary schools, then I knew like insurrection stories, and that shaped my narrative. So I wasn't talking about slavery. I'm talking about, did y'all know that Toussaint L'Ouverture led the Haitian Revolution and blah 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 blah, right? And so that's how I went through school. In 9th grade, I was reading about Asada, and not because, again, my parents were like Panthers and activists in that way, but because I had that information and knowledge. So when I came to Howard then, that further like introduced me to the diaspora of something that we need to talk about, like really what does it mean to do diaspora work? And it's one of my suggestions, but I'm gonna go ahead and loop it in now. We live in a very U.S.-centered, African-American-centered, hegemonic space of thought and narrative. Like as African Americans, and I know that because of the work that I've been doing around the diaspora, like how many of us actually travel to the diaspora? And right now there's lots of access. Like I've been to some of the blackest places on the planet, Haiti, in the villages like of the Maroons in Suriname, in the rainforest, like in Curacao, like where they're speaking Papiamiento, they're not even speaking Spanish or French or Portuguese, right? Like the Belmer and the Netherlands. And so what I find in these other spaces is that what people often like share about blackness, it comes from a very U.S.-centric standpoint. But even when we talk about in these spaces, African-American, there's a lot of us that are not African-American in this space right now. because their ancestors are not coming directly from like the U.S. plantation system here. Some of my ancestors came to New Orleans from Haiti and Jamaica, but I do acknowledge like I have lineage, long lineage, like of my ancestors that built this country. But I also recognize that I also had like Haitian ancestry. My great grandmother was Haitian, so we have to like get out of that that space, right, and really understand what it means to be diaspora and do that Pan-African work where we don't like put a hierarchy in terms of like how we are and who we and what we do as a people. So that's the first thing. Like I then graduated from Howard and was teaching here in DC and enjoying Malcolm X grassroots movement. So I have to just give it like before there was a Black Lives Matter movement, there was a lot of different movements. I have got to acknowledge MXGM. Monifa Bandeli, Lumumba Bandeli, my god brother and god sister, like they like the work that MXGM was doing, like with Black August, and like really like taking young people who didn't know anything about political prisoners, and like through hip hop and through concerts, like raising awareness, that was powerful work. And I was like, I could be down with this movement because they're connecting to me in a language in which I understand. And it's not just a whole bunch of angry people with djembes and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not knocking that, but I'm just saying like it was just a way that was like very accessible to me. And that's why I joined MXG, because I was like, oh, this is a concert with Mos Def. Let me go and see what that's about. And through that, then that's when I started understanding about what it meant to like free the land. Through that information, I know who Chokwe Lumumba was. I met Rukia and so, just so many people, right? So like, I think that is like very important in terms of accessibility. So through that, though, I realized in watching Monifa Lumumba, I was like, I can't call no rallies. I'm not going to do that. That's not me. So then going to Temple to get my master's in African American Studies, I was like, what can I do? I went into the African American Museum in Philadelphia, and my mind was blown. And so what I've realized is that our institutions, our cultural institutions, are a space for everybody to be able to come into and learn about our history and culture in a way that is very highly accessible. Everybody's work does not look the same. I can't tell you the last time I've been to a rally or march, because that a part of my Ache and what my ancestors want me to do is not a part of that work, right? But I think that work is critical. But there are so many different spaces where our work is needed. The arts is so crucial. So Goldie, thank you for saying that. The arts is critical. So when we make things accessible, what is the media? Like, what's television looking like? What's our documentaries looking like? What's our film looking like? What's our exhibitions looking like? So, there was a huge like movement called post-blackness through like contemporary art that I was not down with. Post-whiteness I am down with, though. I'm very much so down with post-whiteness and understanding our narrative of who we are as a people beyond what white people have said about us, right? So in dismantling the U.S. hegemonic narrative, in my work, I study Black dandyism and well-dressed men, because I like to see a well-dressed Black man. Whether he's straight or gay or queer or trans, I just love seeing well-dressed people with their bow ties on and their hats and their suits and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of the work that I'm doing and through my exhibitions. Sex crimes against Black girls, I'm doing that work through visual arts exhibitions. Studying Black identity and xenophobia in the Netherlands and Zwarte Piet and blackface through exhibitions. So my second thing that I'm going to in terms of what my prescription is Black History Month. Like we take that for granted. So there are a lot of things that we take for granted. HBCUs, we take that for granted, right? Every country does not have a Black History Month, and every narrative of Black people in every country is not the same. In the Netherlands, there are people who have been there for the past maybe 20, 30, 40 years. There's no such thing as Black History Month. I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to demand as Black people in all spaces, and it's only a month at a time. We should be studying our history 365 days of the year. But at least if our kids are learning about their history and culture in a concentrated manner, like at some point in time, I think that's very important. The third thing I would say is that we need to reclaim African spirituality. Now, I'm not a proselytizer. I am not a proselytizer. I believe that everybody should acknowledge, even if you don't want to be spiritual at all, you want to be agnostic or atheist. What I do know is that the Haitian Revolution was won by a group of Vodou priests. That's what I do know. I do know that Queen Nanny of the Maroons from Ghana was a priest. That's what I do know. I know that the Surinames who have been free in the rainforest of Suriname for hundreds of years, they were Zumbi of Palmares, also like Yoruba, Orisha worshiper. So I can identify with the spiritual system that's going to have us enslaved psychologically. I don't think everybody needs to go and sacrifice goats and chickens like I might be doing, right? But you need to acknowledge a spiritual system where your freedom is primary, where you're not learning to turn up the cheek and do all kinds of other things and wait until you're dead to like get some kind of liberation. That is what I do know. So I need to say that we need to, I know Shango, who is my father, is about a war against, the people who will hurt his children. So he is in me. So, I'm just saying, I think we need to reclaim African spirituality. And lastly, in terms of what we can do next year in 2017, there is a National Museum of African American History and Culture that's opening right down the street. Most of the places where we live, there is a black museum, a black cultural institution. Become a member, volunteer, start. If there is not a membership group, create a membership group. Like the arts is very important. You're talking about narrative. How do we see ourselves when we look up on the walls and we see artwork or whatever? That is like that's all psychological as well, right? So we need to support our cultural institutions. So that's what I would suggest. That is all I have to share with you all today. Thank you very much for having me here.
I don't even know how you follow that, but I tell you, talk about energy. But I was thinking, as my sister was speaking, if each of us would reach out to 100 people to tell them about the experience we've had here yesterday and today, we'd be touching 10,000 people. And so each of you here, you're a leader. And we need to take that forward. But I appreciate the energy all you young folks bringing up here, because we need to bottle that and just store that and use that. So I want to thank you. And with that, Zakia? Yeah. Zakia, there you go.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. I am Zakia Sankara Jabbar. My name is misspelled, so that's Sankara, Sankara. And I am an African born in Cleveland, Ohio. So I want to reinstate that. I am here hailing from Ohio. I'm now living in Dayton. I am a mother, I am a wife, and I'm a warrior, as defined by Brother Wakisa earlier. I hope he's still in here. And so I organize specifically around educational justice. My organization that I co-founded and I'm now the executive director of is Racial Justice Now, based in Dayton, Ohio. And I started the organization based out of my own experience as a mother. My son was 3 years old at the time, attending a preschool, a private preschool in the Dayton area, and he was expelled, 3 years old. So there's a crisis in education, specifically for Black children. We've been organizing now for several years. We release a biannual report card on school discipline, so I really appreciate the sister that was here earlier specifically talking about the data collection and talking about those are the things that we actually do well in education. And so Ohio is one of the states that actually does do a really good job of data collection on school discipline, and we're breaking it down by socioeconomic class, by race, by gender, even migrant status. I mean, there's amazing data collection, but no one was paying attention to it. Every state does an academic report card, but we were like, well, we want to do a discipline report card, and we're going to do it from an African-centered perspective. We're going to look at racial disparities. We're going to look at early grade push-out, and we also looked at ninth grade push-out. And so basically almost every school district out of almost 1,200 in the state of Ohio, because we're charter proliferated, all of them are their own school district, got an F on the report card. So that's a crisis. We're at a crisis level. And so that, to me, for education, changing the narrative around that is how do we change the narrative that dehumanizes babies, literally, right? How do you look at a 3-year-old that's doing age-appropriate behavior and then basically push them away? They internalize basically not liking school because they've been identified and pushed out. And so that's a very critical work that I'm dedicated to. And then I also really realized once I was doing that work that, again, like someone else said earlier, it's connected to housing, right? It's connected to parents being at the margins, literally in abject poverty. Some of our parents that we're organizing with literally don't have lights, gas, and water. That's real. Dayton is an old industrial town. You know, after NAFTA, all the plants basically left. General Motors was there. Ford was there. All of that is gone now. So those middle class jobs that you used to be able to work in the factory with a high school diploma does not exist. And so poverty is a real issue all over the city. We're very segregated. It's Southwest Ohio. Ohio's just in the news again, right, for killing a child. That's the kind of environment that we're living in and trying to organize with. One of the things that I see in organizing, because I want to say that I don't have any professional training, so to speak, in organizing. I started out of an experience and began to educate myself independently. And to begin to figure it out. I'm still figuring out, like how do I organize and get my community and parents in particular who are directly impacted by these policies to push back. We do have local control right now in Dayton when it comes to our locally elected school boards. Many people are still fighting for that in bigger cities because the schools have either been taken over by the state, which is another form of oppression and taking away our right to vote for our locally elected school boards, and privatization is proliferating all across the country. That is impacting our community more than anybody else, and it's really at a critical place right now. And I feel like there has to be more conversation about how then do we both preserve local control, because we are funded by property taxes, and if you are owning a home and even if you're renting, you're paying into that school system. So then how do you organize a community to control the curriculum, control who's teaching, control the principals, control all of that? And that is very difficult for many parents who are already living at the margins and trying to figure out how to, put food on the table and make sure they have lights, gas, and water. So one of the things that I wanted to recommend is, like some folks mentioned earlier, before, sort of the national movements, there are, whether you know about them or not, there are small groups of people in every community in this country that are organizing and doing work. All right, we have to figure out a way how to support them and to how do we then lift up the grassroots? Because I can say, and some of the things I say may hurt a little bit, but I feel like they need to be said. But I feel very uncomfortable, not in this room, but I would say in the space, sort of walking into this Congressional Black Caucus event thing, because I feel like when I look around, how are they then connected to the people that they're representing in our communities? Because when I look around, and not just in Dayton, but around the state of Ohio, we're losing pretty badly, right? And then so what then are the policies that our representatives, what then are we fighting for? I had an opportunity to see Joyce Beatty yesterday, who represents the Columbus area, where Tyree King was just murdered by Columbus police officers. That's 3 black people just this summer murdered by Columbus police. So then what are we doing then besides continuing to pontificate and talk about the issue? What then are we doing to change the things to prevent that from happening again? Those are the things that I struggle with in my community as a small, organization. Organizing around John Crawford, right? There's nothing in place to prevent that from happening again in an open carry state. So then how are we supporting the grassroots folks? Again, like this sister here said, we're preaching to the choir. We got to get out in the community and get the grassroots folks who are going to be directly impacted and most impacted by these policies, and get them to the table and get them organized in a very, very real way, quick. Because if we continue to sort of have silos of organizing, or the resources stay at the top through this nonprofit industrial complex, then we're going to continue to be on panels for years to come talking about the same things. And this is not an indictment. This is just being real. Because I feel like the nonprofit industrial complex, we have to begin to also talk about that, right? Talk about how then do we create our own independent funding streams to fund our own movements. That, to me, has to happen, because I see that there's limitations even with funding. There's going to be limitations to what you can actually do. And so then is that freedom? Is that liberation? Then how are we going to get there if there's all those limitations? So I want us to think creatively about that. And one of the things that I thought about was that how then do we create a list of grassroots organizations, locally organized organizations, create a list, and then we collectively, right, we tap into our networks, we tap into other people that we know, and give small amounts, right? Just give. I mean, it doesn't have to take a lot for each of us to be able to support the work. I can tell you right now, we definitely don't have a lot of money at all, but we are able to grassroots organize for people just to pay for space sometimes, right, to have an organizing meeting. It doesn't have to take a lot, but if we're going to be real, we do have to have full-time paid advocates and organizers to be in spaces. We have got to be political, not apolitical. And right now, that's what I'm seeing in my community, because there are professional organizations like teachers unions, they have representation. The principals have representation. Where is representation for the students and parents, though? Like, where is our professional organizations, organizing organizations where we sit at the policy table? Racial justice now is at the policy table of Dayton Public Schools. We were able to organize and do that, but we need that more than just in Dayton. We need parents who are directly impacted, young people who are directly impacted in every single seat and within our public school system, especially if they're local control. Those are things that we can begin to do now. To organize and get people there. So those are the, and then also I wanted to say, the narrative piece, we have got to decolonize education. So white supremacy does not stop at the door of a college or a university. I argue that that is actually where it's actually cultivated and perpetuated. And that we have to begin to create, or use, because nothing's new under the sun. We have warrior scholars who've come before us. There's books out there, there's things out there that we can independently educate ourselves and the community. I would argue that we need communiversities in our community. Do it in a library. And because the information has to be there for our people so that we can change the narrative. And finally, start a Saturday school. My husband and I in Dayton run a Saturday school through the West Dayton Youth Task Force, where we use the principles, the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, as the basis of our curriculum. The Nguza Saba. So everything that we've been talking about, cooperative economics, self-determination, we literally are starting with our babies. We start with 4-year-olds and we go all the way up through 4th grade. We can use that as a foundation to eventually be able to create independent African-centered schools all across this country, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. So we're gonna diverge a little bit from the actual agenda we have. What I'm going to ask us to do is we're going to go into our deliberations in our small groups, but I'm going to ask if we can go into 7 groups for each of the panelists to sit in the group, probably average about maybe 6, 7 people per group, and if we can make sure we have at least 1 panelist in each group, we're going to ask you then to look at the question of what do we need to do to create our own narrative, and have a discussion. And then what we're going to then is ask for you to appoint at least someone to be a scribe, but then we want to get the salient key points from your group discussions. So if we can form into 7 groups with 1 panelist in each group, averaging about maybe 6 or 7 people per group, we'll do that for about 30 minutes. We'll come back and then see what we come up with. Okay? All right, we can do that. 7 groups. Okay, I'm going to give you about 1 more minute. We're going to wrap up and then have you report out by groups. 1 more minute. And hopefully you've identified someone to be your spokesperson. I thought I did something. Okay. Hello. So we're going to have now each group, hopefully you've identified someone to be your spokesperson. I'm going to ask you to give a succinct, salient, brief overview of the things that came out, key points from your group. And so whoever would like to start, we will start with that group. So who would like to go first? We have a mic here. Which group would like to present? Right there? Yeah.
Testing.
We have your attention. We have a group ready to go. Okay, folks, we have your attention. Go ahead.
Well, our group had the privilege of having Ms. Lumumba in our group from the panel, and we started off talking about the difficulty of doing community work because of the lack of trust, which some of our other speakers talked about today. Even if you want to do cooperative economics and you're wondering if you're putting your money in, if somebody else is going to run off with it. So we started talking from the prospect of not how much and what are you going to do with it. If you don't have the luxury of a 20-year history of being in a singular community, or if that's where you raised your family, what can we do to start generating that? So then we all went into sharing stories, including reversing a lot of the common stories. And I shared a story of being on the metro, of having two men reach out to make sure I didn't fall when the train started to shift. So instead of talking about hanging onto your purse and being careful and people stealing your electronics, to tell the stories about people making sure you get to the right stop, making sure you don't fall, and jumping up and giving you a seat. We also had someone talking about a need in the neighborhood and how the young men that are hanging out on the corner, instead of running to the other side and ignoring them, you make sure you say hello and you speak, so that the day that she needed help, she could walk over and just say, this is what's going on. Oh yeah, Mama, I got you. So the idea of being respectful, we cannot expect respect if we don't give it. So creating community by establishing the love, providing a place where people feel safe. If you're inviting people from the community to do something, you invite everyone. And if it's the folks who never got invited before, you make sure that you invite them to your place. That we're talking about creating positive histories. We can't go back 20 years or 2,000 years. We're going to start now and build it so that when there is time for a project to be done, it'll be a lot easier for people to want to smile, be loving, and trust you with their money and their other gifts if you are acting in that type of accordance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. You're going to turn the page for me? Great. First, you should know that this is sacred. And I only knew it was sacred when I stood up here, because I've asked Holy Spirit to tell me when it's sacred, and my body is like, this is sacred. Okay. So in this group, we talked about learning our history, creating a Black agenda. What is EEL? EEC? Yeah, we were talking about that. The emotional emancipation circles, that we really need to be trained in how to manage that well, so it doesn't turn into something that gets to be personal and something that we don't want to go to or we don't want to be involved in, because remember, they talked about me. So we have to figure out how to train to do this, to do it well, to do it professionally, to do it ultimately with the highest order of love. the highest order of love says to me, I can be wrong and I'm still loved. Okay? We should reach out to elders and actually help shape who elders are in our response to it, in our expectation of what being an elder is. Talk about having our stories told and having our stories listened to. We should deal with the piece of having family histories told in different ways, and the part of the technology takes care of that so well. We can just ask them to talk to themselves and create this recording that we can compile together. There's a whole piece of reparations. And reparations in terms of economics, in terms of land, in terms of what we honor about what we leave our children and what we keep together as children, what we do in terms of ordering how we sequester, tithe, put away something that talks about the future. The 40 acres and a mule that was never gotten, and then the 40 acres or the 20 acres or the 1 acre that you got being, I have a friend whose family had 125 acres, and when her father needed $35 to have work done on the tractor, that the bank required him to put up the entire 125 acres for the $35. And had he defaulted on the $35, this bank would have taken 120 acres from them that they still have. We create our own narrative. Important is the cultural context. All of the arts. We can tell a story, and one of the things that I'll have to break in here and say, I've been studying white Christian television. They have a genre of a movie. They do movies every Saturday morning. I'm getting back to Boston so I can see this movie early Saturday morning. It's a minimalist movie in that all the dinners they have don't have food on the table. All of the context is the same kitchen every time, but they tell a story. And so if we think about talking about making movies that have the story well told, we won't have to worry about the production value of they didn't have any turkey on that Thanksgiving table. So it's not a matter, it's creating a new genre for ourselves, not necessarily that. And it's done in parable TV, by the way. And the technology and having cultural best practices, creating a construct in the workshop, in something in the work, toolbox that says this is appropriate, this is not appropriate. We really should be questioning whether or not we've asked the right questions, said the right things, given honor to the right suggestions. And one of the connecting the voices, and I'll tell this quick story. I moved to Boston 25 years ago to do the work of deciding how to validate the barbershops are cultural institutions in the black community. I'm a barber of, in July, 50 years. Cultural institutions in the black community. In 1992, I did somewhat of a microcosm of that where, okay, all right, get right there. I'll stop my story. Affirmative action whips. The New Deal in Social Security, how that was co-opted. Did the first affirmative action? The first affirmative action was white people, always. All of the New Deal, Social Security, GI Bill, all of those things were to give exception to people who were of a particular class. All of those New Deal things marginalized, if not made invisible, all of our rights as citizens in these national programs, in these federal programs, in these local programs. In particular, the black farmers who got choked out of all of their money. You should know, does anybody remember the woman who was working for the agriculture department and they fired her? You should know that the reason they fired her is that she was a part of a suit where they were suing because they had 6,000 acres of land that had been taken from them, and that suit was just about to be settled. And so you should know that she and her husband won that suit for millions of dollars, and as a result of that, they bought a plantation that was established in 1856. So a lot of what we can't get a hold to is because if we start figuring out how to multiply it rather than lose it, it changes things. Did I get everything? Yes. The biggest piece around it is collecting. The what? The methods? Domestic. Oh, yeah. Everything that involved black folks' work was not honored, respected, or acknowledged. Doing the New Deal and doing whatever they're doing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we ready here?
Okay, so my name is Joyce, and we started out with a small group. It was me and Chantrell, and then we grew, which is wonderful. But there was some really incredible things that happened in our group. First, it was all sisters, and then this brother joined the group, and one of the things he asked us to do, can we all stand and hold hands? So, rituals. As we create our own narratives, we must have rituals, rituals of affirmation, rituals that teach us, you know, and so that was powerful. We did that ritual. And this sister here is from New Haven, and she has a bookstore, so she put that in the space. And we began to talk, what happened to our bookstores? And so she's from New Haven, this sister here is from Trinidad, this sister here is in D.C. now, this brother's, Maryland, you're in D.C., and then of course our facilitator here, the New Orleans queen here. And I'm in Portland, Oregon. So the connection that we have, she talked about her bookstore. I started an independent black institution when I was 19 years old in 1970. And one of the things we did, we created a bookstore. And our bookstore started out as Black Educational Center bookstore, and then 4 years later, I stepped out of the classroom because I wanted to, you know, have a family. And I decided that I wanted to change the bookstore. I changed the name to Talking Drum Bookstore. And this sister here was talking about how our bookstores and our spaces need to have a little pizzazz. You know, some of them have gotten a little old and stale. So when I took over the bookstore, first thing I did, one of my favorite colors is peach. I painted it a bright peach, and all the brothers and what the heck, Joyce, are you doing? But guess what? Everybody in the city came to Talking Drum because it was welcoming. It was a space where people could learn. We had when the authors would come to the white bookstores, I'd call them up and say, look, we're a little black bookstore on 17th and Alberta. Can we get Ntozake Shange to come and visit us? And so that's how we create those narratives. So we talked a little bit about the role of these spaces that we have, bookstores, barbershops. They should be centers of learning, centers of affirmation. They are natural gathering spaces, spaces where we organize, and most importantly, intergenerational. And so we kind of thought that creating narratives needs to happen wherever we are because we carry the narrative within us. And we need to be able to share it. We need to stop. I was in the hotel and there was a woman who worked there. She had a little 5-year-old daughter. And I just happened to have been to a bookstore and I found some black books. And I asked the mom, I said, do you mind if I read to your daughter? So here I am in this hotel, this 5-year-old girl reading her stories. And see, that's what this struggle is all about. We have to speak up. The Black Lives Matter movement has affirmed for us. And you know, back in the day, we didn't call it Black Lives Matter, but we did a lot of the same things y'all did and more. But we don't like to talk about it because some people think they might still go to jail for some of the stuff they did. But bottom line is, I just need to say this. This space here is a sacred space in this conference. When I came in here, and I tried to get here yesterday, but something came up and I left. I had to go back to the hotel because I was kind of tired. But when I came in here this morning, this was home. This was the village. you know, and I looked around and, you know, the froze, the locks, you know, doing what we do to affirm ourselves. I mean, the smells, the natural smells. I mean, it's just wonderful. This is our space. This is our space. And I hope that every year there can be a space like this. The last time I came to this conference was about 15 years ago. So, but anyway, and this sister here, I just got to say, I sought her out. She was standing over there. I said, "You gonna have a group?" And she said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "Well, if it's nobody but me and you, we gonna have a group." And so we have a group. So thank you for giving me. Oh, and my brother here, he did make the point with the Nanny Burroughs Institute. Wait a minute, you gave me. I'm a spokesperson now. He said we need to own our spaces, and that's a real important one. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have to move, folks. Thank you.
Basketball field.
Thank you. Okay, next group. Next group.
Let me. Okay.
Who's up?
Good afternoon, everyone. Excuse my back for those behind me. We're the youth and young adult group, and we also spoke about bridging the gap. Bridging the gap is really important, and we discussed the responsibility of the elders, or the older of the community, to create a space for the young people that you might not necessarily identify with at this time. It's very important because the major society, the majorities in our culture have taught us to not embrace each other as a community, that the community raising all of the children is not a good thing, when that's the way I was brought up. I remember it like that. I gave the example of there being no cell phones at all, but if I acted up in school, by the time I left out, Miss Jenkins knew, Miss Betty was on the porch like, "Oh, you gonna get it?" And they knew because it was a community who raised us, so that was very important. Another thing we discussed is the individual interests of youth as access points to engage with the narrative. So a lot of youth, young people, adults are into gaming, dance, hair, nails. I myself am a barber as well, a barber stylist. And I'm bridging the gap doing a project personally where I spoke with Alan, who was a facilitator in our group from the panel, and told him I wanted to display young men and their nephews, fathers, cousins, uncles together, and their beards. But to not get into that, it is a place, a barbershop and a salon, it is a place historically where we heal. So I have 3 degrees, but I also have been doing hair and cutting hair the whole time and haven't stopped, because it just is so powerful coming into contact with my people on a daily basis, from little kids all the way up to older people who seek my wisdom. It may be a little bit of wisdom, but it's someone that they feel comfortable with, that they can identify with and talk to. Another component was ownership and giving of your own knowledge. Every stage of your life, you can share it, because there's someone who identifies with you, no matter their age, their genre, their culture. They can identify. So if you hold in the information, you don't share it. And speaking on a 5th grade level is what they tell you when you write for news. I reported the news and I speak, and they said, keep it simple. I won't say the last word for the acronym KISS, but a lot of people in here, I'm sure, have heard it. Keep it simple. And when you do that, you can just tell your narrative and share it with someone, just whatever their educational level is. It doesn't have to be big words. It can just be, hey, let me pull you to the side and just share with you whatever I have to offer. Another one was explore your lineage and find your personal narrative. Look at what your last name may mean, because I know I've met people on Facebook that said, where did your last name come from? And I had no idea. They flew me and my son to Florida, and they helped me find where it came from. And it turns out that Wilbur Halyard drove Martin Luther King to his I Have a Dream speech in D.C. So Wilbur Halyard's house is a landmark in Florida, and I thought I was alone as a Halyard from New York, but it's 1,000 of them in Jacksonville, Florida. So sometimes you can be challenged to just check and see what your last name may mean, what your mother's maiden name may mean, what your grandfather's name may mean, because sometimes you can find your self-worth through your ancestry, and you can pass that on to a younger brother or sister or cousin who's having difficulty in their life. Also, to emphasize relationships and building both internal and external relationships, and work to elevate our resiliency. And when we tell our stories, it doesn't have to be in a combative manner to say it's against what has been done to us. There's so many wonderful things that has been stated that we can share without a response to white supremacy. It doesn't always have to be a response, my colleague said, but it can just be, we're just casually telling our story because it's a great story. It's not that we had to fight off this and ward off the chains and get off the boat, but also that, you know, we sang songs and we did literature and we did the arts and, you know, we were great. So I tell people, just take whatever you know about history and just pass it on. I said even something as simple as knowing, I know from education, but another person who doesn't have education may not know the medical staff and its representation is from Imhotep. Imhotep did surgery before that German man who they have doing surgery in our history books. Imhotep is the real father or god of medicine. So when you look at our current society, you can see so many things that are implanted here from ancient Kemet. Not just the medical staff, but the book of Psalms was in the book of the dead. The alphabet comes from that. So there's so many things in our culture right now in white educational society, for lack of a better term, that you can take and relate it back to our history way before there was America and Columbus. Okay. So that was it. Thank you.
Next group, who would like to go next?
Hotep. I'm George Leary, and I am the only male representative in our group, and because of such, I have been appointed as the spokesperson. I don't understand why. I guess we are following the traditional African model where the male may be the head, but it's really the women that kind of run things. So I hope I do honor and justice reflecting our conversation. So the question was, what do we need to do to create our own narrative? And it seemed like it was getting kind of overwhelming just talking about and being aware of the so many ways that we are really oppressed, and that's how so many avenues in all areas of our functioning, whether it's education, economics, health, whatever, are oftentimes seem like they're completely blocked. So we thought about what are some useful tools, and one thing we came up was to create a web domain of things that we are passionate about. So really we came up with the idea that the key is communicating. On one hand, there are people that we know in our lives. We need to physically reach out and talk to people and communicate and tell people about, you know, the importance of unifying and coming up with ways that we can do things, you know, in our own community to create something. And then we also talked about the need to do this kind of on a more global scheme. Of course, the logical way to do that is like through the internet these days. So we talked about creating like our own version of Wikipedia, an internet database of knowledge that we could contribute information so that it's everyone around the world in the Pan-African community can have easy access to it. Topics such as food, growing food, we talked about that as a local issue. The irony is that we all consume food, but yet we're completely relying on other people to feed us, and the result is that we end up being poisoned in our bodies and our minds as well as our spirit. We also said that we should establish what do we want to do outside of white supremacy. Was that different than what we're talking about as far as the tools? Ask each other, what is it that we want to establish? What is it that we want to actually build so we can have that kind of open, honest communication so that it's not about ego, one person deciding what we're doing. Study the methods and ideology of our forefathers and mothers, such as Francis Cress Welsing, Sojourner Truth, Marcus Garvey, Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, because the things that we're trying to do now actually have been done before. They may not have lasted. Maybe our focus needs to be on what we need to do to bridge continuity from one concept, one forum, one program to another. And we talked about some things that we could do as far as being activists now in our communities, such as boycotting the FCC, companies and businesses that have anti-black policies, because in order for us to kind of to overcome all of the many obstacles that white supremacy puts in our lives, we have to do something. And so we need to do action as well as having that kind of one-on-one communication with each other in a loving manner as African people should. Anything that I missed? All right. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. All right, I'm going to look down. Oh, you're going to hold it for me? Oh, that's great. Look at that. All right. So we had a rich dialogue, and I might bounce around a little bit because I think these things are related, but they don't flow like they are, so I'll do it that way. So we were talking about some of the dialogue revolved around what we heard on the panels. And so I think we were in agreement that having the youth panel, just before this was really encouraging and inspiring. And basically what came out of that was, we got this, right? Because the youth are inspiring us all. And so we talked about the need for shifting consciousness. And so there was a little bit of discussion about the belief systems analysis and how we can kind of actually talk to people and name things so that we can help people shift in their consciousness in terms of accepting the lies. And so I particularly was interested in one of the panelists who said that we should not, or we should be mindful that we may be preaching to the choir, talking to all of us who are like-minded, or else we wouldn't be here. I'm sorry, I have my back to you. And so I mentioned how even in my own family, in terms of participating in the Black Joy Sunday, that I have a relative who blurts out a lot of ugly things, and how even I feel sometimes like I don't quite know how to handle that. I mean, I know how to check him, and I do, but at the same time, I feel like how far should I go? And I know he and I are kind of light years apart in how we think. And so the feedback from the circle was that you have to name it and say something such as, "You are in the midst of insanity." And name it, interrogate it, and not be afraid to talk about the sickness of our oppressors. Which particularly on yesterday when we saw the clip from the Underground series, and just kind of talking about that with people, and trusting ourselves. In the midst of all that has happened, we still must trust ourselves, and reading and talking more. Again, naming it, imagining what it looks like, visualizing what it looks like to be Black and free. And it's a process that is very liberating. And then we had, near the end of our circle, a discussion about, in some ways, maybe the perceived lack of diversity that might even be in this space in terms of social class, and maybe having representation on our panels or in the planning of this summit from people who identify as trans, which I remember came up last year as well. And so we kind of talked about inviting people into our space who maybe would not necessarily come on their own or may not know about it. Diverse African people could benefit from being in this space, and we could benefit from hearing their voices. And so specifically, I think I hit everything on there, did I? Okay. Oh, and we are inseparable. Connection is power. Thank you.
feedback. We're going to ask you to stay in your groups. We have one more thing we're going to ask you to do after we do our voting, but if you stay in your groups. Sorry about that. Stay in your groups. We have one more thing we're going to do after we're going to vote for our number one item, and so if you can just stay in your groups. After we do that, we have one more activity in your groups we'd like you to work from. Okay?
For us to select our 2017 action, understanding that as we have an opportunity to step back and reflect on all that has been done, we might find that there's a way to synthesize and refine what some of these different pieces are. So, you are getting a copy of the 17 action items that have emerged over the last day and a half. We do have some people who, oh, okay. We do have some people that are out there in the diaspora that have been watching through live stream who may be wanting to vote. Actually, a few people voted and I had to delete them out only so that I could reset the voting polling process. But just for the sake of those who may be watching and want to vote, they do not have this sheet in front of them. But action item number 1 has to do with engaging our representatives and policymakers to implement the UN recommendations on the Decade for People of African Descent. Number 2, work to open publicly the file on reparations, to work on the UNESCO Declaration on Race in order to delete this non-concept in all UN and national documents. Number 3, tell the story of our country's national anthem. Number 4, launch a global visual campaign, #BlackandFree, and what does this look like? Number 5, unify us through our origin of Pan-Africanism using a social media campaign, #I am African born in. Number 6, claim wellness as a human right in the U.S. and organize to bring wellness spaces and wellness centers to our communities. Number 7, teach young black people cooperative economics and support them to start their own co-ops. Number 8, national campaign to take charge of controlling Harriet Tubman's narrative. Number 9, demand cultural competency for educators. Number 10, collaborate across the motherland, America, the Caribbean, and Europe to produce a publication that all Africans can use for a range of ages in different settings, including informal and informal educational settings. Number 11, engage in ongoing self-care and self-awareness, enhance our spirituality, increase understanding of our African culture, spread truth of who we are. Number 12, raise money for social media and education platforms that are African-centered. Number 13, sign on to encourage others to sign on to the M4B Lives policy platform. Number 14, push Black Diaspora History Months and courses in all countries where people of African descent reside. Number 15, publish information about a black subject or event that you feel hasn't been told on Wikipedia. Number 16, divesting from state institutions and private entities that uphold anti-blackness and investing in decentralized community-controlled public safety. And number 17, a visual wheat pasting poster campaign that shows what all black lives look like, accompanied by short descriptions. Pardon me? To share the list. Oh, so I'm sorry, if we didn't have enough copies, I hope you can share your list. So see if your neighbor doesn't have the handout and you can share the list with them. I am going to now take us live to the voting process, the polling process, which I need to, wait a minute. I guess I have to do it from over here. Technology, I love it. Oh, come on. Uh-huh. It means that you're going to select one of these 17 as your favorite for a possible 2017 campaign. It doesn't mean that all the others are going to go by the wayside. It's just trying to get a sense of what do people think is a good campaign that we can all wrap our hands around across the diaspora as a way to begin to do this work for valuing Black lives. And having that as a theme, correct. So, now I have to try to navigate this. I can't find my, where's my, there we go. Come on down. There we go. I'm about to launch this. Okay. So, which recommendation should be the 2017 action? So what you need to do is on your cell phones, and if you don't have a cell phone, just raise your hand. We can provide you with cell phones over here to cast your vote. You're going to text the words with no spaces, Cheryl Grills 667. And you're going to text that message to the number 22333. And then hit send. Then once you hit send, now you are in there and you can pick one number, 1 through 17, that reflects what is your what is your recommendation. So if you need help, a young person who's tech savvy can go ahead and actually help you out. Once you send a message to Cheryl Grills, it will tell you that it says, you've joined Cheryl Grills' session. When you're done, reply, leave. But now, actually, what you do, once you get that message, is pick your number. No, in the address bar, you type 22333. In the message, you type Cheryl Grills 667. Hit send. You'll get a message. Then go back to the message bar now and just type your number. You're picking one number. You're voting one time, picking a number 1 through 17. No, it doesn't matter. You don't need to put caps. Right now, it's a tie between 4, 5. Did you vote? Anybody else who needs help voting, just come up here and we can cast your vote for you. give it one more minute to let the voting finish. If anyone is still having trouble, just let us know and we can cast your vote for you. Don't do anything else except cast stuff now. Uh-huh. Oh, because you left, you didn't spell it right. No, you have to left. Okay. Before we end the voting, anyone else need help casting their vote? 1 more minute? Okay. But once you cast your vote, leave your phone open. Don't close the message because you're going to do something else. Don't leave. No, don't leave. Ignore that. That's when you're completely done. But you can just dial 22333 and get back in. Yeah. Okay. Is everybody done? And is Benson? Can you take a picture of the image? So it appears, unless we're going to have an influx of voting in the next 20 seconds, that we have number 5, unify us through our origin using a social media campaign, I'm African born in. Followed closely by number 4, launching a global visual campaign, #Black and Free. What does this look like? Okay, now I have a follow-up question for you. Given that number 5, and very closely linked to it, number 4, seems to be the selection that people are interested in. So, I'm going to go to, come back here. Some more voting. Next question, on a scale from 1 to 5, how likely are you to participate in its implementation? Number 5. And closely related to it, number 4. Not at all likely, which is a 1, all to 5, very likely. Anywhere between 1 and 5, looking at the scale of not at all likely, somewhat likely, very likely. Yep, just punch in your number. If you're not in, just go back and re-establish yourself. punch in your number to that same, if you didn't close that 223, then put your number in and hit send. If anybody needs help, we can register your number for you.
And I couldn't vote twice, right?
You shouldn't.
I'm saying it won't, based on that, it shouldn't record my number twice.
Not, if you did it twice, it shall, and we hope you don't, yeah. Okay. Did it move? Okay. Anybody else need their vote registered? Okay. Okay.
How likely are you to be involved? One, not at all likely. Three, somewhat likely. Five, four.
Thank you. Okay, you're ready. Your vote is counted. Okay. Well, I still, about 5 or 4 is closely related. We may find a way to link them together. No. Now let's just vote on how likely we are to be involved. That's a NOLA. Oh, sure, okay. Okay, so are we done voting? So it looks like we have, someone took my paper. It looks like we have an interest in hashtag I'm African born in, closely behind that, hashtag Black and Free, and 3/4 of the participants saying that they're very interested and very likely then to participate in implementing this global strategy. So it looks like we have some marching orders. And Anola will talk about, and Jay, some next steps. But I have one more task for you. Don't close that app. Uh-oh. Now, y'all didn't hear me say we're done. I want you to text one word, not a phrase, not a sentence, not a paragraph, one single word, text it, to describe your experience of this summit. No. No, ma'am. And if you see a word that's up there that you like, you don't have to come up with a new word. You can type that same word. This is what's called a wordle. If anybody needs a word text typed in, just come see us. We can do your word entry for you.
We're going to ask you to do one more thing in relationship to the action item. If in your groups, you can take about 10 minutes and think about what are the steps we're going to need to implement these actions. And we would like for you to write those on an index card and give those to us. So, what's that? I can hear you. So if you can put them on the flip chart paper, but if you can take about 10 minutes in your groups, what are the action steps? What are the things you think in your group we will need to do to implement this action? Take about 10 minutes and capture it on your flip chart so we can have that and take forward. And also, if you're interested in being involved with implementing this, put your name or give us your name so that we can then reach out to you to get your involvement and support in doing this. So list the actions you think in your group will need to do to implement this activity, and then give us your name if you're interested in working on this. We're going to give you about 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Okay, so if you can make sure you have your recommendations, steps, plans on the chart, along with names of anyone who's interested in supporting this, let me get those, okay? We'll collect those. You can either put your names on the card or on the flip chart, either on the card or flip chart, either one, but make sure we get your names.
Family, we will actually leave here early. If you would, just breathe with me for a minute. Thank you so much for being here, for having a mind that refuses to die, for bringing that mind from all over the world, applying that mind, and coming up with all the amazing things that you have. I thank God and I thank our ancestors. I thank you. I thank Samuel Aline, my great-grandfather, who was a loyal, dedicated follower of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. I want to remind you to make sure we get your sheets with all of your implementation suggestions. You've got evaluations that we would like to have from you. There's going to be a chair out there where you can leave the evaluations as we depart from one another. I want to thank each of you, but most especially, I want to thank our young people. Thank you for coming. And really lifting my spirit so very high. When we started this, one of the things that was very clear to me was that we had failed you. Our generation had failed you because we'd gotten distracted by so many other things. And one of our goals with Community Healing Network is to heal that rupture that we created. And so I look forward to the opportunity to talk more, to circle more together, and for more multi-generational conversations, and to your advice and counsel as we move forward. I want to thank the board of Community Healing Network. Board members who are still here, would you please stand? And Jay, come out of the corner. I also want to thank the AB Psi family that we have grown to love so much. Thank you for all that you do. And then I have to say, Cheryl. Just amazing. 2011, we go to her, we say, we're insane, we want to build this movement by 2019, and we don't get laughed out of the room. She said, yeah, I'm with you. And I cannot begin to express to you the level of commitment and dedication and just, I'm running with this. She leaves today for South Africa to do a training in EECs. We wish you well, sister. Travel safely. In terms of next steps, one of the things that I believe in very strongly is keeping our word. And so when we tell you that we will send you a summit communique and a toolkit with all the brilliant work that you have done and that our panelists have done, we will do it. Last year, as Cheryl mentioned, we made the mistake of saying we would do it within 2 weeks, and we did it. But we weren't engaging in much self-care during those 2 weeks. So we're gonna take some self-care time, and we will do it within a reasonable time. You will have it. And then in terms of following up for this Action 2017, what we have asked Charlene Phipps, who you've seen doing everything over the last day and a half. Charlene, just to make sure, so people know who you are. To facilitate a task force of people here who may wish to work on the implementation. So if you want to do that, Charlene will have a sheet of paper she'll put in her computer, and we'll create a task force over for Action 2017. So if you want to be part of that task force, and we hope you will be, please see Charlene before you leave. Charlene is a quintessential servant leader, and that's what we all seek to be. I want to just end with the words that inspire me. And again, it's Marcus Mosiah Garvey. We have a beautiful history, and we shall create another in the future that will astonish the world. Now that I know that we have 250,000 years of history and strength and philosophy and value to lean on, I am even more certain now that we will in fact be able to reach our 2019-2020 deadline. I thank you. And please just remember, as you breathe, as you go out of here, that we are with you. We see you. We see you. And thank you for that exercise, Cheryl. I don't think I will see Black people in the same way. And I loved Black people before. I really do love Black people. I loved them before, but now it's gonna, I can't even express how much more. Now that I have seen the vulnerability, now that I have seen our ancestors in you. So, thank you, thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Just a reminder, as we come to an end, I'll be standing up here with the video camera. If you want to just share 2 to 3 minutes of why this has been important and something you learned, it's going to be important for the history of this particular summit. So I'll be standing right here. I'm going to get you to write your name down, email address, so that we can contact you should we use it in any kind of video context.
So as we close out, in the tradition of our emotional emancipation circles, we can't just walk out the door. That is not our way. So I'm going to ask everyone to get up and come and form a circle. And